You've tuned in to the unavailing frequency. But don't touch that dial. We've got you right where we want you.
At the time of this writing, human beings have explored approximately 5% of Earth's oceans. The remaining 95%, vast, pressurized, lightless, remains as alien to us as the surface of distant planets. We have better maps of the moon than we do of our own ocean floors. We've named craters on Mars that no human eye will ever see in person, yet the deepest trenches of the Pacific remain uncharted, unsurveyed, and, we've always assumed, empty of anything that might look back at us. We assumed wrong. This is Leviathan, what swims beneath the skin of the world. Part 1, The Dragon's Road. I want to start by telling you that I am not a man who believes in monsters. I want to tell you that. I want to believe it myself. But the truth is that belief has a funny way of rearranging itself when you're floating alone in the South Pacific at 2 o'clock in the morning, clinging to a piece of composite aircraft fuselage the size of a dining room table, and something enormous moves beneath you in the dark. Something so large that the water itself changes temperature. Something so deep and so ancient that the pressure wave it generates as it turns, just turns, mind you, the way you might roll over in your sleep, lifts your makeshift raft 4 inches out of the water and sets it back down with a sound like a cathedral door slamming shut in an empty church. I want to tell you that I don't believe in monsters. But Wyatt Drake has always been a bad liar, and the ocean doesn't care what you believe. My name is Wyatt Drake. I am, or at least I was before the world cracked open beneath me, a senior environmental impact analyst for Meridian Pacific Consulting based out of Portland, Oregon. I was 34 years old, 6'1", in reasonable shape for a man who spent most of his daylight hours hunched over a dual monitor setup. And I had what I would describe before all of this as a reasonably good handle on my life. A steady income, a craftsman bungalow in the Woodstock neighborhood that I was always slowly renovating, a golden retriever named Copernicus, and a relationship 3 years deep, complicated in the way that all relationships are complicated, but something I had believed in the way you believe in the structural integrity of a bridge you cross every single day without thinking about it. Her name was Renata Daniels. She had dark hair cut short on one side and longer on the other in a way that she made look effortless. She laughed at things that most people didn't think were funny. She was a ceramics artist who smelled perpetually of clay and eucalyptus, and she was the most unconsciously magnetic person that I have ever been close to in my entire life. The kind of person that rooms reorganize themselves around. The kind of person that other people can't help but gravitating toward. Not because she asked them to, not because she performed anything, but simply because she was warm in the way that a fire is warm. Entirely natural, entirely indifferent to the effect it was having, and devastatingly easy to get close to. I need you to understand all of that before I tell you about Marcus. Marcus Hell, my colleague, my professional peer technically, though he would have argued that point, and did argue it frequently, in the particular passive-aggressive way that Marcus had perfected over the years, which involved never saying the quiet part loud, but making absolutely certain that you heard it anyway. Marcus was 31, worked in the same division at Meridian. He had a jawline like a magazine advertisement, a kind of effortless confidence that certain men are simply born wearing, the way other people were born wearing their bone structure. He was good at his job, I'll give him that, even now, even after everything. He was good at his job the way a crowbar is good at opening things, efficiently, forcefully, without any particular concern for what got damaged in the process. The project that sent me to the South Pacific, the Meridian Tanaka Deepwater Assessment, a contract worth north of $4 million to evaluate the environmental feasibility of a proposed deepwater cable routing through the Melanesian Basin. It was mine. It had been mine from the first conversation. I'd written the initial proposal on a red eye from a conference in Seattle, typed it on my laptop with a bourbon and ginger ale balanced on a tray table, half delirious, but more inspired than I had been in years. I'd spent 6 weeks building the methodology. I'd sourced the oceanic survey data, cultivated the relationship with Dr. Aiko Tanaka's team at the Kyoto Marine Institute, and written the framework that Meridian's partners had signed off on in a 40-minute meeting that ended with the managing director, Robert Fitch, saying, and I remember the exact words because I have replayed them so many times since, "This is exactly the kind of thing that keeps us ahead of the curve." And then Marcus had been assigned to the project as a secondary analyst because of capacity concerns, and somewhere in the 8 weeks that followed, the project began to feel less like mine. It happened so gradually that I couldn't point to the exact moment. Marcus had better presentation instincts and skills than I did, I'll admit to that. Where I tended toward thoroughness in meetings, toward the full explanation, toward making sure everything that was supporting data points was accounted for, Marcus had this gift for distillation, finding the one gleaming sentence that made a room of executives feel like they understood something complex without having to do the work of actually understanding it. It started presenting sections of the report in our weekly check-ins. It started corresponding directly with Dr. Tanaka's team, CCing me as a courtesy, his name appearing first in the email thread. It started saying, "Our approach and the methodology we developed," in ways that I'd noticed and yet said nothing about. Because what was I going to say? Because the words weren't technically wrong. Because I knew rationally that this was how collaborative work operated and that work itself was what mattered. And that I was probably being oversensitive. The anxiety I felt every time I saw Marcus's name above mine in a CC field, it was probably just professional insecurity dressed up as something more legitimate. I told myself that. Approximately 400 times over 2 months. And then Renata met Marcus at the Meridian Summer Mixer, the rooftop party that the firm threw every July on top of the Pearl District office building. String lights, a craft cocktail bar, and the kind of panoramic view of the city that makes everyone feel briefly like they deserve their lives. I'd introduced them myself. Renata had laughed at something Marcus said within the first 90 seconds. The specific laugh, the one that reached her eyes, the one I had always thought of as mine. And I stood there holding a gin and tonic and felt something cold and dark, yet completely irrational, moving through my chest like a tide going out. Nothing happened. I do want to be clear about that as far as I know. As far as any evidence ever showed me, absolutely nothing has happened between Renata and Marcus. What happened was entirely internal. It was the cold, dark thing that moved through my chest that night on the rooftop, and it didn't leave. But it settled in. It began to make a home. It began quietly and persistently and with remarkable creativity to find evidence for itself everywhere I looked. And the way that Renata mentioned his name once in passing, and the 3-second pause before she answered when I asked if she thought he was charming, and the fact that Marcus had started texting me project updates on weekend afternoons when previously he'd been strictly a Monday through Friday business hour communicator, as though he wanted me thinking about work, thinking about him, on the days when I might otherwise just be at home with her, present, uncomplicated, and unafraid. But that's the thing about envy that no one tells you clearly enough. It doesn't require evidence. It is a self-generating emotion. It's the only emotion I know of that can sustain itself indefinitely on nothing but its own hunger, growing larger and more elaborate and more persuasive as it feeds on the very attention you give it, trying to assess whether or not it's justified. Every reassurance becomes suspicion, every denial becomes evidence, every moment of peace becomes a setup for the next wave of it, and the wave is always a little higher than the last one. By the time I boarded the Pacific Meridian Flight 2247, the charter service from Portland to Suva, Fiji, with a refueling stop in Honolulu, I'd been living with that cold, dark thing in my chest for 3 months. I'd become fluent in its language. I had started to suspect in my worst moments that it was the truest and most accurate thing about me, that beneath all the rational, measured, professionally competent exterior of Wyatt Drake, environmental impact analyst, partner, renovator of Craftsman bungalows, the thing that most honestly described me was the hunger, the want, the terror of losing what I had to someone who seemed to want it less and deserve it more. I didn't know that boarding that plane, there was something older and larger waiting for me in the water. I didn't know that the ocean had a word for what I was carrying, and I didn't know that that word was Leviathan. The charter flight was operated by Pacific Meridian Air, a regional carrier that Meridian Consulting had used before without incident. The aircraft was a Boeing 767-200 extended range configured for long-haul overwater transit. There were 63 people on board, 11 Meridian employees traveling for various client projects throughout the Pacific Basin, the remainder a mix of business travelers, researchers, and a small tour group of retirees from Sacramento heading to a 2-week South Pacific cruise that would now never happen. I remember the first 3 hours of the flight with the hazy, unremarkable clarity of any long international leg, the plastic-wrapped dinner, the bad movie I half-watched with the volume too low, the particular discomfort of trying to sleep in an economy window seat with a neck pillow that served no discernible anatomical function. I had a window seat on the left side of the aircraft, row 22, and at some point over the open ocean, with the cabin lights dimmed and most of the passengers asleep, I had pressed my forehead against the cold plastic of the window, and I looked out at the Pacific below us. There was no moon that night. The ocean was invisible, not dark exactly, but just an absence, a negative space so complete that it was indistinguishable from the sky above it, so that we seemed to be flying through a universe that had not yet decided to contain anything, just the red blinking of the wing light, rhythmic as a heartbeat, and the faint reflection of my own face in the glass, transparent, ghostly white, superimposed over all that nothingness. I was thinking about Renata. I was thinking about the last conversation we'd had before I left the airport, which had been about nothing really, logistics, the dog, whether I'd remember my adapter plug, but which had felt beneath the logistics like two people carefully not saying something. I was thinking about the way she'd hugged me at the door, which had been warm and real and entirely present, and about how I had stood in that hug and been unable to stop my mind from running its ugly little calculations, checking for deviations from the baseline, auditing the warmth of evidence of guilt or distance, conducting my small, sick internal investigation while she held me like she actually did love me. I was thinking about Marcus, the way you think about a splinter, not constantly, but this persistent background awareness that shifts the quality of everything around it. And then I snapped back as the aircraft shuddered. Not the ordinary turbulent shudder, the brief rattling of trays and overhead bins that makes first-time flyers grip their armrests. This was different, a deep structural sound like something had knocked on the aircraft from outside, a hollow resonant boom that I felt in my molars and in my sternum before I heard it with my ears, followed immediately by a second shudder, harder, and then the unmistakable sensation of the nose beginning to tip, too far, at the wrong angle, the cabin lights go into emergency red, and someone behind me beginning to scream before the oxygen mask dropped from the overhead compartments and hit the air in a cascading rustle like the world's worst applause. I don't remember everything that happened in the next 4 minutes. I remember the masks. I remember reaching for the one in front of me with hands that were completely calm in a way that felt physiologically impossible. The way that extreme fear sometimes shortcuts directly past panic and into that pre-natural, almost eerie steadiness. I remember the aircraft banking hard left and the unsecure items bags, laptops, someone's reading glasses. They became sudden projectiles. I remember the quality of the sound changing from the organized chaos of emergency procedures to something rawer, less organized. A sound I can only describe as the sound of a situation that had stopped being a controlled emergency and had become something else completely. Then I remember the water. I don't mean I remember seeing it. I mean I remember the moment the aircraft hit the surface. Not smoothly, not the way disasters movie depict the water landing as a firm but survivable skid, but violently, at an angle, the nose going under first and the fuselage folding like foil, the explosion of cold Pacific water that took the window out beside me and hit me with the force of a car accident, and the darkness and the turning and the complete dissolution of any sense of up or down or time or anything. I survived because I'm a strong swimmer, and because I had the presence of mind and the disorienting, churning blackness to find the emergency exit by feel and push, and I came out through into the water that was cold enough to feel like pain, dark enough to feel like death. I survived because I kicked upward, or what I believe was upward. It was what felt like 3 minutes, but probably was only 30 seconds. I survived because there was wreckage on the surface, large sections of the fuselage that had separated intact, and I grabbed the nearest one with both hands and held onto it with everything I had. I survived because I was, as my name was always meant to suggest, brave in battle. But I didn't feel brave. I felt like a man drowning in a cold black sea, which is what I was. When the first pale gray light of the dawn began to separate the sky from the water, I could see the extent of what had happened. The aircraft was gone. Below the surface somewhere, and however many thousands of feet of water lay beneath us in the section of the South Pacific, the Boeing 767 and most of its contents had already begun their descent to a seafloor that, statistically speaking, had almost certainly never been seen by human eyes. The surface of the water was scattered with the debris-filled foam cushions, overhead bin doors, sections of the overhead compartment housing, pieces of luggage that had managed to stay sealed, a life raft canister that had been deployed but was half deflated. The smell of aviation fuel overlaid everything else with a chemical sharpness. And there were people. 5 of them, including me, visible in the early light, each clinging to a separate section of the wreckage, distributed across maybe 200 yards of the debris field. The first one I identified was a woman roughly my age, dark-skinned and broad-shouldered, treading water beside a section of aircraft floor the size of a queen mattress. She had a gash across her forehead that had bled dramatically down the left side of her face and dried into a dark mask. But she was awake and moving, scanning the water around her with the methodical, controlled attention of someone who was very deliberately not allowing herself to panic. I would learn later that her name was Dr. Priachetti, and she was a marine biologist traveling to the research station in Venuta, and that she was the most competent person I've ever met in a crisis, which is saying something, because the crisis we were in, it was the worst I can ever imagine. The second was a heavy-set man in his late 50s named Gordon Platt, a retired military contractor from San Diego who had survived 2 tours in Afghanistan and a helicopter crash in 2009, and who greeted the discovery that he was adrift in the South Pacific with approximately the same energy as a man who was finding the milk slightly past its due date. A resigned, sighing pragmatism that was both deeply reassuring yet vaguely unsettling. Gordon had found a mostly intact life vest and was sitting on top of his piece of wreckage rather than clinging to it, arms folded, watching the horizon with the patience of someone who'd been uncomfortable before and knows it'll pass. The third was a young man who couldn't have been older than 22, the build and the logo-heavy clothing of someone who'd been on vacation, shaking so hard he was creating his own small wake. He told me his name was Carson, just Carson. When I managed to paddle close enough to hear him, he said it with the frantic repetition of someone who was using the sound of his own name as a life preserver. He was from Columbus, Ohio, He'd been going to Fiji for a surfing trip, and he didn't stop shaking for the first hour. But he didn't let go of his piece of wreckage either, which I thought meant he was going to be alright. The fourth, and here my memory does something involuntary, sharpens in a way I wish it wouldn't, was a woman named Bethany Cho, mid-40s, Korean American, who was wearing the remains of a very expensive looking blazer and who had the particular bearing of someone accustomed to being the most organized person in any room. She had somehow managed to collect 3 floating seat cushions and lash them together with a piece of seatbelt webbing she'd retrieved from somewhere, creating a small platform. She was sitting on it cross-legged, holding a small waterproof phone case above the surface of the water, checking for any signal with the focused persistence of someone who believes that the right problem-solving approach can be applied to any situation, including this one. I paddled between them, connecting the scattered nodes of our small, catastrophic community, and we treaded water together in the growing light and looked at each other and didn't say the obvious thing for a while, which was that there was 63 people on that plane, and only 5 of us were visible. The water around us was very, very quiet. Gordon said it eventually. Gordon was the kind of man who said things eventually. "Search and rescue," he said. "Flight plan was filed. They'll be looking." "How long?" Priya asked. Her voice was steady, a doctor's voice, I thought, the voice of someone trained to deliver information that lands like a fist. "We're 8 hours out of Honolulu?" Gordon looked at the sky the way military men look at skies, like it owes them something. "Deviation from course would have triggered alerts when we went down. If the ELT fired before the electronics went, we've got a beacon. Could be about 12 hours. Could be 24. "Yeah, it could be longer," Bethany said without looking up from her phone. She wasn't being pessimistic. She was being accurate. I appreciated it. "Yeah, it could be longer," Gordon agreed. Carson was still shaking. I paddled close to him and put my hand on a piece of fuselage beside his and said, "What's your last name, Carson?" He blinked at me. "Reeve." "Carson Reeve. Okay, I'm Wyatt, and that's Gordon, Priya, and Bethany. You're from Columbus, right? What part?" Clintonville." "Hey, my college roommate was from Clintonville. Good neighborhoods, big trees." And I had no college roommate from Clintonville. I had no idea whether Clintonville had big trees, but Carson nodded, and the shaking slowly and incrementally began to settle, and it was worth that small lie. We floated. The sun rose properly and hit the water, and the Pacific turned from black to gray to blue so clear and deep it looked manufactured. The blue of a screensaver, the blue of something that had never had anything to do with human beings or their concerns. The debris field drifted slowly. We drifted with it. Bethany gave up on cell signal and began methodically checking the waterproof phone case for any other useful technology inside it. Gordon found a section of emergency equipment housing attached to his piece of fuselage. He pried it open and extracted 2 emergency flares, a folded space blanket, and a handheld water purification device that he held up with the satisfaction of a man who's won a small bet with the universe. I floated and looked at the water and tried not to think about what was beneath it. The ocean here was deep, profoundly deep. We were somewhere in the general vicinity of the Melanesian Basin, and the seafloor in this region sits anywhere between 12 and 18,000 feet below the surface. That's 3 miles. More than 3 miles of water beneath us, of lightless, cold, uncharted water, of everything that had ever been seen or named or cataloged, of the 95% that human civilization had simply agreed to call empty because it was easier than admitting we didn't know. 3 miles of dark. I thought about the Tanaka Project. I thought about the bathymetric surveys Dr. Tanaka's team had shared with me, the sonar imaging of the basin floor, the false color topographical maps that rendered the underwater landscape like an alien terrain, mountains and valleys and trenches and plains, all of it sitting slightly in the dark, and all of it exerting its cold, slow pressure on everything else above. There had been one image in the survey data that had stopped me for a long time. I'd zoomed in on it, examined it, and then closed it and not opened it again. It was a section of the basin floor at roughly 14,000 feet where the sonar imaging had returned an anomalous reading. A void, essentially, an area where the sonar signal had been absorbed or deflected rather than reflected back. It was creating a blank space in the image the size of a small city. Dr. Tanaka's team had notated it as a likely data artifact, a sensor calibration issue, and just moved on. And I'd moved on too. There was no reason not to. It was almost certainly nothing. But I thought about that blank space now, floating on the surface of the water that sat above it. I thought about how far down it must have been. And then I thought about Renata, the way you grab onto the nearest ordinary thing when the extraordinary becomes too large to hold. I thought about her hands specifically, about the way she held a coffee mug, two-handed, the thumbs overlapping at the top like a little roof, the way she'd done every morning for 3 years on the back porch while Copernicus investigated the yard. And the thought was so vivid and so complete that it hurt, the way only things you might never see again are allowed to hurt. I just wanted to go home. I wanted to go home and stop the ugly calculations, stop the auditing, stop the cold, dark hunger that had moved into my chest and called it home. I wanted to stand on the back porch with a mug of coffee and feel the morning and trust the woman standing next to me the way I had once trusted her, the way I had trusted her before the mixer, before Marcus, before this cold, dark thing began to take hold. I would go home. I told myself that. I would get back. And when I got back, I would be different. I would be better. I would be the version of myself that deserved the morning and the porch and the woman who laughed with her whole face. I told myself that as the sun began to climb. But I didn't know that the water had been listening. It was Gordon who noticed it first because Gordon was the kind of man who notices things. "Hey," he said sometime in the early afternoon in the same tone he might have used to point out an interesting cloud. "Anybody else feel that?" We all felt it at approximately the same moment. A subtle shift in the surface tension of the water. A gentle but definite pressure wave, like the bow wave of an enormous vessel passing at some distance. The debris field around it shifted, turning us slightly. Various pieces of wreckage rotated on their axes in a slow, synchronized way that had nothing to do with the wind or the current. Carson's piece of fuselage bumped against mine with a hollow sound. The surface of the water went briefly, perfectly glassy. Not still. Water's never truly still, but smooth in a way that felt pressurized, like the surface of a pond when something large passes beneath it. And then, 20 or 30 yards to the south of our loose grouping, something moved in the deep. Not at the surface, not close to the surface. It was visible only as a shift in the color of the water, a darkening in the already dark blue, as though the water itself was becoming more opaque in a specific location, gathering its opacity around something that moved through it in the way smoke gathers around a form that moves through it. A shadow beneath the surface. A shadow that was not the shadow of any cloud that I could see above us. A shadow the size of a city block. I watched it. We all watched it. Nobody said anything for a long time. "Fish," Gordon said finally, without any particular conviction. "Big school of fish. Tuna can bunch up pretty dense out here." "That's not tuna," Priya said. Her voice had changed. Not panicked. She didn't really do panic. I was already learning that, but altered in a specific way. A shift in register that I recognized without being able to name it, as the voice of someone whose professional knowledge had just made contact with something that professional knowledge is not equipped to address. The shadow began to circle, slowly with a patience that felt ancient. It described a wide arc beneath us, maybe 200 yards in diameter, and as it moved, the pressure wave moved with it. The debris field shifted, and the water continued its eerie, surfy glassiness. Carson made a sound that wasn't a word. And then, as gradually as it appeared, The shadow deepened and diffused and was gone, moving downward away from the surface, back into the dark form from which it had come. The water surface normalized. A small wave generated by nothing visible. It began to slap against my piece of fuselage. We all just looked at each other. 12 hours, Gordon said finally, and he looked at the sky again, and his expression had changed by something small but measurable, the way a very good poker face can still betray something if you look at it carefully. 12 hours, they'll have a fix on the ELT signal. A C-130 will be in the air. Yeah, Price said, I think that's right. We didn't talk about the shadow, but all of us, I think, all 5 of us floating on the wreckage of the thing that had carried us above this water, had now deposited us into it. We were thinking about the 95%, about the part of the world that we had always agreed not to know, about what had never been cataloged or named, about what was down there in the dark below us, and the 3 miles of cold and pressure and silence, and what I was beginning to understand with a certainty that moved through me like cold water moved through a man's open mouth, had noticed us. Night came slowly, and then all at once, and then the dark. Something began to move. This is Leviathan, what swims beneath the skin of the world. Part 2, The First Fire. There's a specific quality to darkness over open ocean that has no equivalent on land. On land, darkness is never complete. There is always something. The amber wash of a distant highway, the blue pulse of a neighbor's TV through a curtain, the orange glow of a city on the underside of clouds 20 feet away. Even in the deepest wilderness, there are stars sharp enough to cast faint shadows, a moon that renders the world in silver and charcoal, some evidence that the planet is inhabited by creatures who have mastered light. On land, darkness is a condition. It is something the world does temporarily. You wait it out, morning comes. Yet, on the open Pacific at night, with no moon and a cloud cover that has moved in from the northwest over the course of the afternoon, darkness is not a condition. It becomes a substance. It has weight and texture. It sits on the surface of the water like something poured there, and it presses against your eyes with the same indifferent force that the water presses against the soles of your feet. And it communicates in a register below language that you are in the wrong place. That human beings evolved in the firelit caves and on sunlit savannas and in lamplit rooms for reasons that were not arbitrary. That the dark has never belonged to us and knows it. I've never feared the dark. I want you to know that because I want to understand the specific quality of what I felt that first night, floating on the wreckage of Pacific Meridian Flight 2247, because it was not the ordinary fear of darkness. It was something older than that. Something that came from the part of the nervous system that predates language, predates cognition, that belongs to the portion of the human animal that is still underneath everything. Prey. It's the fear of being watched by something you cannot see. A primal terror. Gordon had the flares, and Gordon made the decision about the flares. And the decision was right, even though it cost us something I couldn't qualify or quantify even at the time. He fired the first one at dusk, a brilliant magnesium red eruption of light that arced 60 feet into the air and bathed our small floating community in its bloody radiance for approximately 25 seconds before dying, and we all watched it fall and disappear. And we watched the darkness rush back in behind it with the eagerness of something that had been waiting its turn, and felt the particular desolation of a signal sent into the void that does not answer. He held the second one up. "Dawn," he said. "We fire the second at first light. If there's a search aircraft with invisible range, that's when they're most likely to see it." Nobody argued. Gordon's logic was sound, clean, military. It was probably correct. We formed the closest thing to a consensus we would ever achieve in those hours. Bethany and Carson had managed to link their pieces of wreckage together with a length of seatbelt webbing that Bethany had been carried around her shoulders like a bandolier, and Gordon paddled his section close to theirs and lashed them together with a section of wire he'd stripped from somewhere in the emergency housing. I brought my piece alongside Priya's, and we used a strip of torn seatbelt upholstery to maintain proximity, and the five of us ended up in a loosely connected cluster, maybe 30 feet across at its widest point, bobbing together in the new dark. It was not comfortable. The Pacific at night, even in the South Pacific where the water runs warmer than the northern reaches of the ocean, it was cold enough to be dangerous over time. Not immediately lethal, not the hypothermic emergency of the North Atlantic, but a sustained, patient cold that I could feel beginning to work on me, leaching heat from my core with the methodical persistence of something that understands it has all the time it needs. We had the space blanket from Gordon's emergency kit. We took turns passing it around, wrapping it over shoulders, around legs, though it was small enough that it could only cover one person at a time, and it provided it to one person, which meant that removing it from another, so the warmth it offers was always conditional, it was always borrowed. Priya sat close to me, not for any particular reason, I think. Proximity of our wreckage, the natural gravity of two people who've already spoken more than the others, but I was grateful for it. She had used a strip of her shirt to bind the gash on her forehead, and the faint starlight that occasionally broke through the cloud cover, the dark line of the improvised bandage across her forehead, gave her a look of accidental severity, like a warrior's marking. "Marine biologist," I said sometime in the first hour of dark. Talking felt necessary, not for information but for sound, for the evidence that human voices still existed here, in this place that seemed to have no record of them. "Coral reef ecologist, specifically," she said. 5 years at the CSIRO in Perth before the Vanuatu posting." "So you've spent time at sea?" "A great deal of time at sea." She paused. "But not like this." "No," I said, "not like this." The water moved beneath us with its slow, dark breathing. "What you said earlier," I said. "When Gordon said it was tuna, you said it wasn't." I let the pause sit for a second. "What do you think it was?" She didn't answer immediately. Priya was not a person who answered before she was ready. I came to understand that about her quickly, that the pauses weren't reluctance, they were precision. The same precision she would apply to a water sample or a data set, the discipline of not saying more than she actually knew. I don't know," she said finally, which is itself a bit informative. "Informative how?" "I've been researching vessels above most of the major marine habitats in the Pacific Basin for the better part of a decade. I've seen whale sharks, I've seen aggregations of sperm whales, I've seen blue whales from a zodiac at a distance, 40 feet, which is the most overwhelming physical experience of my professional life. I've seen footage of a giant squid. I have a reasonably comprehensive understanding of the upper register of what this ocean contains." She paused a moment. "But what I saw this afternoon, the displacement, the pressure signature, the shadow area, It doesn't correspond to anything in that register. The water shifted, subtle, a deep breath. How large? I asked. I'm not going to speculate, she said. Priya. Wyatt. She said my name with a flat, quiet emphasis. It was not unkind. I am not going to speculate about that tonight. Not here in the water, not here in the dark. I let it go because she was right. There are things you just don't say on the water in the dark because saying them changes the quality of the darkness itself. And the quality of the dark that first night was already as much as I could take. The flashback, when it came, it arrived the same way it always came. Not as a memory I chose to examine, but a visitation. The past arriving without knocking and making itself at home in the present without any apology. It was the Tuesday 3 weeks before the crash. The conference room on the 14th floor of the Meridian building, the big one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked west over the river, the one they used for client presentations. The quarterly review of the Tanaka Project deliverables with Robert Fitch and two of the other managing partners, and the video feed from Dr. Tanaka's team and Kyoto on the main screen, and Marcus and me sitting at the same side of the table in a proximity to me that always felt subtly competitive, the way two animals sitting close together at a water source are technically sharing and technically not. The presentation was mine. The slide deck was built on my framework, my data signature, my months of analysis. Marcus had contributed the executive summary section, genuinely well written. I told him so because it was. And 3 pages of supplementary market analysis that were solid, if not exceptional. The rest was mine. Yet Marcus presented it. I'd let him do the first section, the overview, because he was better at the overview. I do acknowledge this. I'd consciously made the decision to let him lead with his strength while I handled the depth material. That was the arrangement, implicit but understood. But Marcus did not stop at the overview. That son of a bitch. He moved through the methodology section, my methodology, the one I had built from survey data and regulatory precedent. 3 weeks of conversation with Dr. Tanaka over video call at 6 a.m. Pacific time. He did it with the fluency and ownership of someone presenting their own work. He used first-person singular. I developed the assessment framework based on, and my analysis of the Bathmeritic data suggested, and when I worked through the Melanesian Basin specifics, not we, not the team, not even the passive voice that would have been technically neutral, but first-person singular, in a room full of people who were forming impressions and filing them, and who would carry these filed impressions into every future conversation about the Tanaka Project, and who authored it, and who was the engine of Meridian's capacity in this space. I sat beside him, I watched it happen, and I said not a damn thing. I said nothing because I was too stunned to speak at first, and then because I was constructing the ejection in my head, finding it difficult. I didn't have a clean entry point. There was no single sentence I could interrupt that wouldn't sound pretty paranoid or petty or both. And then because Robert Fitch was nodding in a particularly satisfied way that meant he was impressed, and interrupting a moment of Robert Fitch being impressed. That's professional suicide. And then because the moment had passed, the next section had started, and I'd lost the opening forever. And I sat there, and I let it happen. And the cold, dark thing in my chest, the one that had moved in after the rooftop party, the one that had been feeding on my suspicions about Renata and Marcus for weeks, it found new food in that conference room. And it consumed it with a hunger that frightened me. Because it wasn't just professional injury I felt sitting there anymore. It was confirmation. It was a sensation of a fear you've been telling yourself is irrational, suddenly producing evidence, suddenly pointing at the world and saying, see, I fucking told you. I've always told you that. And you've always chosen not to listen. And after the meeting in the hallway, Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. Hey, good work on those data sets, man. Fitch loved it. Good work on those data sets. Like I was his fucking research assistant. Like I was someone who had retrieved information that he had then assembled into something meaningful. I said thanks, because I didn't know what else to say, and because the cold, dark thing was so large by then that there was barely room in my chest for anything else. And Marcus had smiled genuinely, without any apparent awareness that he'd done anything. And I walked back to his office, and I stood in the hallway for a long time, looking at the river through the window at the end of the hall, at the flat gray water of the Willamette as it slid past under an overcast sky. And I thought about what kind of man I was becoming. What kind of man stands in the hallway after something like that and just says, thanks? What the hell kind of man carries his hunger quietly and then calls it professionalism? I called Renata from the parking garage on my way out. She picked up on the third ring with the ambient sound of her studio in the background, the white noise of the exhaust fan, the occasional sound of her tools. Hey, she said. How'd it go? Fine, I said. It went fine. A pause. You don't sound fine. I'm just tired. It was a long meeting. Did Marcus do that thing again where he talks over you? She'd noticed it. She'd seen it before I'd fully articulated it, which was one of the things I loved about her, and which, in my worst moments, I turned into evidence against her, that she had noticed Marcus. She had formed an impression of him detailed enough to detect his patterns of behavior, that he was present enough in her mind to be the first name she reached for. The cold, dark thing had turned that even against me. Well, something like that, I said. Come home, she said. I'm making that lemongrass soup that you like. Yeah, I said. I'm coming home. I had driven through the gray Portland afternoon with the hunger in my chest and the soup waiting and the woman I was failing to trust in her studio with clay on her hands. And I had sat at the kitchen table and eaten the soup and said nothing about what I was carrying. She had talked about a gallery in the Pearl District that was interested in showing her work, and I had listened and asked the right questions and played the part. I'd performed the version of myself that was present and glad and unafraid. It was the best performance of my life, which is a terrible thing to say about an evening with someone that you love. I came back from the memory to the sound of Carson crying. Not loudly, not the theatrical grief of someone who needed an audience or attention, but the quiet, persistent, high-pitched sound of someone who's been holding something very large in for a long time and has quietly stopped being able to hold it. In the dark, the sound carried across the water between us with the particular intimacy of the ocean at night. It had no walls to absorb the sound, no furniture to break it up, nothing between the source and your ear but 30 feet of open air and the small sound of water against wreckage. Hey, I said. Carson. The crying didn't stop, but it shifted, became more controlled the way sound changes when someone becomes aware they've been heard. You're doing just fine, man, I said, which was inadequate, but somehow true simultaneously. There was a woman, Carson said, in the row behind me. She was helping me with my seatbelt when the masks came down. She was like a mom. She was being like a mom about it. A pause broken by the specific unsteadiness of someone breathing through the tears. She just kept saying, "You're okay, honey. You're okay." Right up until... He stopped. Right up until she wasn't. I know, I said, though I didn't really mean it. Not really. I know. Gordon had been quiet for a while. I couldn't see him clearly in the dark, could only make out his bulk on the far side of the linked wreckage, a shadow among shadows, but I could hear his breathing. It was steady and deliberate, in the way of a man who's decided to be steady and deliberate, and is applying will to the achievement of it. Gordon, I said. Yeah, still here, he said. Are you doing okay? I've been uncomfortable before, he said, which was the Gordon Platt version of yes. Bethany was asleep, or performing sleep, with enough commitment that the distinction didn't matter. She'd found a position on her lashed-together seat cushion platform she determined was optimal and committed to it with the same decision of pragmatism that she'd applied to every problem since the crash, and I respected her for that. Sleep was the most useful thing any one of us could have. Sleep conserved heat and calories and the psychological resources we were going to need for the daylight hours when decisions needed to be made. But I couldn't sleep. I lay on my back, on my same section of fuselage. It was wide enough barely to support my full length if I kept my arms in. If I looked up at the overcast sky and listened to the ocean, and I breathed and I thought about nothing very successfully for a few minutes before the thinking started again, which it always does, which is the particular tyranny of a mind that will not rest. I thought about that shadow in the water. I thought about the mathematical surveys, the blank space, the notation, likely a data artifact. I thought about the book of Job, which I had not thought about since a confirmation class at a Lutheran church in Beaverton, Oregon when I was 14 years old, which was not an experience I thought that I'd ever think about again. But the words came back now with the sudden clarity that certain memories achieve when the conditions are exactly right for them. The old words, the strange, specific poetry of them. Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord thou lettest down? Canst thou put a hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? I had not thought about Leviathan in 20 years, but floating on the dark Pacific above 3 miles of uncharted water, with the pressure waves and the shadow fresh in my nervous system, I thought about it now. I thought about the book of Job's specific insistence on Leviathan's immensity, not the vague enormity of the myth, but the detailed, almost forensic enormity of something the author had tried to describe accurately, and had found language insufficient for. His breath setteth coals ablaze, and a flame goeth out of his mouth, and his neck remaineth strength, and sorrow is turned to joy before him. The ancients had known something. They must have seen something, or had understood something about the deep water that modern civilization, in its confidence and its electric light, had chosen to reclassify just as a metaphor. But what if it wasn't metaphor? What if the ancients had simply been honest about the ocean and what it contained? And it was us, the moderns, the mapped and measured, GPS-coordinated ones, who had decided for the comfort of it, those monsters were just figurative. I was still thinking about this when the water erupted. There's no other word for it, not a breach, not disturbed. It erupted. 20 feet south of our linked cluster of wreckage, the surface of the ocean simply came apart, driven upward from below by a force so enormous and so sudden that the resulting wave hit our cluster before I'd processed the visual of what had caused it, lifting the whole length assembly 6 inches and slamming it down. I heard Carson shout, and Bethany's voice sharp, and Gordon saying something I couldn't make out. And then I was scrambling upright on my section of fuselage and just staring into the dark to the south, trying to understand, what was I looking at? It was there for perhaps 4 seconds. 4 seconds is not enough time to fully process what you're seeing when what you're seeing is impossible. The mind performs a rapid triage. It grabs the data points that it can handle, and it fills the rest in a location marked later, or maybe never. What I can tell you is what survived the triage, what I've been able to reconstruct from those 4 seconds every day since. Something broke the surface, something that displaced the water around it, not in the way of a breaching well, but the explosive vertical launch, the elegant gravity return, but in a way of something much larger, simply rising, the way a submerged continent might rise if continents were alive and purposeful, pushing the ocean off of itself with a casual, indifferent force. The surface in the water and the space around it went flat, and then vertical, standing up in walls, and then the faint available light, the traced starlight through the broken clouds and the phosphorescent agitation of the disturbed water. I could see a surface that was not quite skin, and not scale. It was not anything I have a word for. It was dark beyond the darkness of the water, and it covered in what looked in my 4 seconds like geometry. Not random patterning of animal markings, but something that suggested structure and intention and age. And then it was gone. It didn't submerge so much as it withdrew, the ocean rushing back in to fill the space that it had occupied, and the pressure wave from its disappearance hit us a second time, smaller than the first, and the phosphorescent wake, glowing briefly green and white beneath the surface, and faded, and we were alone in the dark once again. But we were all awake. We were all upright. We were all looking at that place where it had been in the way that people look at a place where lightning struck. The specific, stunned attention of those who have witnessed something that has permanently rearranged their understanding of what the world is capable of. Gordon spoke first. This time his voice had changed. The patient military pragmatism was still there. It was a structural instinct to him, not cosmetic, but underneath it, close enough to the surface to be audible, was something else. Something old. Something that didn't have a rank or a protocol. "Flare," he said. "Give me a reason not to fire the second flare right now." "You said dawn," Bethany said. "I know what I said." "Maximum visibility, maximum likelihood of aerial observation," she said. "Those parameters don't change." "The parameters have changed," Gordon said with quiet precision. "But the rescue timeline hasn't." A silence, water against the wreckage, the distant fading phosphorescence. "What was that?" Carson said, a statement that was looking for a contradiction. "What was that? What was that?" "Carson," Pry's voice calm, level, the voice she would use for the rest of the night every time that Carson tipped toward the edge. "We're okay. We're all here. We're all together." "What was that?" "We don't know yet," she said. "And we don't need to know tonight. Tonight we need to stay on the wreckage, and we need to stay close together, and we need to make it to morning. That's the job, nothing else." There was a pause. A long one. "Okay," Carson said, quiet but shaking. "Okay," I said. Gordon didn't say anything, but he had put the flare down. It circled us for the rest of the night, not continuously visible, not at the surface, not after that first appearance, but present in the way that something enormous in water is always present to those floating on it, through presence and displacement, and the subtle, maddening reorganization of the surface that telegraphs deep movements the way a vibration telegraphs what passes through the wall it travels along. Every 40 minutes or so, approximately, I counted, because counting was something to do with the fear, a way that of somehow giving it a container. The water around us would go through its ceremony, the surface tension shifting, the debris field turning, the wreckage lifting and settling, the phosphorescent agitation in the water below us, like a bioluminescent storm at some unfathomable length. And then the stillness, and the waiting. And then 40 minutes later, the ceremony started again, almost like breathing, like something that breathed in 40-minute cycles, like something that was not sleeping. I lay on my back and looked at the overcast sky and listened to it breathe and thought about what it meant that something in this ocean had a cycle, had some kind of rhythm, had something that functioned like a pattern of attention, like watchfulness, like interest. But what does a creature of that size find interesting? We were what it found interesting, apparently. 5 small, warm-blooded animals on the surface of its water in the middle of its dark. 5 small animals on pieces of their destroyed flying machine, leaking heat into the cold, breathing their visible breath into the night air. 5 animals that had arrived here from above dropped into the domain of something that had never had the occasion to notice the surface world before, something that lived so deep and moved so slowly through time that the entirety of human civilization might have paused above it like the weather, like a change in the quality of the light at the top of the water, unregistered and irrelevant, at least until now. Priya had moved closer to me at some point in the middle of the night, not for warmth, though it was cold enough to justify that, but for the same reason I found myself grateful for her proximity, which was that animal need to be close to another member of your species when this thing in the dark is not your species at all. She was awake. I could tell by her breathing, which was controlled rather than loose, the breathing of someone maintaining something. "Job," I said very quietly. She turned her head slightly towards me. "What?" "The book of Job. Leviathan." I paused, feeling slightly absurd, and then feeling that absurdity was a luxury I couldn't currently afford. "The sea monster, the ancient one that God points to when he's answering Job's questions as evidence of his power." I paused again. "Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook?" A long silence as the water shifted. Below us something vast turned in the dark. "In Jewish tradition," Priya said slowly, as though she was being careful with the words, "the Leviathan is described as the chaos creature from the beginning of creation, pre-existing the ordered world, dwelling in the deepest water where order never reached it." She paused. "In some versions, God created it and then had to restrain it. But if it were ever fully unrestrained, it would unmake everything." I stared up at the dark sky. "In some versions," she continued in the same quiet, careful tone, "the reason the ocean exists is for the Leviathan. The deep water is where it lives. The world was just built around it, above it, like a ceiling over a basement that nobody checks." "You know a lot about this for a coral reef ecologist." "My grandmother was a rabbi," she said. "You absorb things." There was a pause. "Wyatt." "Yeah?" "It's been watching us since before the crash." I turned my head toward her. In the dark, I could barely make out her face. The blank in the survey data?" Before I could stop myself, before I could decide whether to say it or not, I said it. "There was a blank in the bathymetric surveys for the Tanaka project, a section of the basin floor where the sonar signal was absorbed rather than reflected. The team had called it some kind of sensor artifact." "How large?" "Several square miles." She didn't say anything for a long time. "I think," she said finally, "that we should all be very still and very quiet, and that we should make it until morning." "Yeah," I said. "And I think," she said, "that in the morning we should talk about what we're going to do." "Yeah," I said. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. But I closed them and I listened to the water breathe, and I thought about Renata holding her coffee mug with both hands, her thumbs overlapping, steam rising in the cool morning air of the back porch, and Copernicus moving through the yard below, and the ordinary morning sounds of the Woodstock neighborhood, the distant traffic on Powell, the neighbors' wind chimes, the specific quality of Pacific Northwest light, and the early morning that's gray and soft and full of moisture, smells like Douglas fir and rain. And I held on to that. I held on to the way that I'd held on to the piece of fuselage when I'd surfaced from the wreck, with everything that I had, without technique, without strategy, with only that desperate grip. The second day arrived not with a sunrise, but with a cloud cover. It was too complete for that. With a gradual, reluctant brightening, the sky going from black to charcoal to a flat iron gray that turned the ocean the color of old pewter. It was enough to see by. It was enough to take stock. We were all still there, all 5 of us, all on our linked wreckage, cold and stiff and unslept, but alive. Carson had dark circles under his eyes. His jaw was set with that particular tension of someone who spent all night clenching it. Bethany had rebraided her hair and was examining the contents of Gordon's emergency kit with the focused attention of an inventory specialist. Gordon himself was sitting upright on his section, looking at the horizon in every direction with the systematic patience of a man running a search pattern. And when his eyes completed the circuit and found me watching him, he gave a small mental nod, which I returned. Priya was already in the water. Not far. She'd slipped off her section while the rest of us were orienting to the morning and was treading water beside the wreckage, her head below the surface for a moment, then back up, looking down into the depths. I leaned over the edge of my section. "What are you doing?" "Looking," she said. She brought her head up. Her eyes were serious in a way that reached all the way down. "It's gone deeper. I can't see any sign of it anymore. No thermal differential, no bioluminescent residue. It went down after first light." "So that's good?" Carson asked from behind me. I hadn't realized he was listening. "That might be good," Price said in the precise way that she had neither confirming nor alarming. She hauled herself back onto her section with a swimmer's efficiency. "It might simply be that it's diurnal, more active at depth during daylight and surfacing at night, in which case we can expect it to return." "Tonight?" I asked. "Possibly. Probably." She wrung water from the hem of her shirt. "We need a plan that accounts for tonight." Gordon stood up on his section, which was remarkably a stable thing for a man his size to do on a floating piece of aircraft, and he fired the second flare. It went up red and brilliant in the gray morning sky, higher than the first. We all watched it arc and watched it fade and watched the gray close back in behind it and felt the silence of the Pacific absorb it without a trace. Then Gordon sat back down. "Now we wait," he said. "For rescue?" Bethany asked. "For rescue," Gordon agreed. Rescue did not come on the second day. We waited. We rationed. Gordon had found a sealed emergency hydration pack in the fuselage housing, a collection of those small foil water pouches that taste of plastic and desperation. And we divided them with a mathematical precision that crisis reduces food and water to, each of us taking exactly 1 pouch every 4 hours and counting the hours with a care that made each one feel enormous. Bethany found, floating in the debris field, a sealed plastic bag containing 3 granola bars and a protein powder sample packet that made all of us briefly absurdly happy. Carson found a small hand mirror and a cosmetic bag that had kept its seal. Mirror had survival value, could be used as a signaling device, and he showed it to Gordon with the proud anxiety of a child showing a parent something useful, and Gordon took it with the seriousness that it deserved. We talked. We told each other things that people tell each other when there's nothing to do but wait, and the thing in the dark beneath them had not surfaced since morning. Not the confessional truth-telling of people who think they're dying, but the ordinary, texture-rich, slightly fragile truth-telling of people who need to remember that they are real, that they have lives that are waiting for them somewhere above the horizon. I learned that Gordon had a daughter in San Diego who was pregnant with his first grandchild. She was due in 6 weeks, and that this was the thing he held on to. Not his military history, not his survival training. A 6 weeks away grandchild, as yet ungendered, as yet unnamed, as yet entirely theoretical, but already the most important thing in the world to him. I learned that Bethany was a project manager for a pharmaceutical logistics firm, and that she had been traveling to Fiji for her first vacation in 4 years, alone, because her marriage had ended 8 months ago in a way she described only as amicable but necessary, and that she had sat in her apartment in Seattle after the divorce was finalized and booked the Fiji trip within the hour because she had decided that her life needed to contain something that was only hers. I learned that Carson had been going to Fiji to surf because his best friend from high school had died of an overdose the previous spring. The trip had been something they'd planned together, and that he'd decided to go anyway, alone, because it felt like the right way to say goodbye to someone he didn't know how to say goodbye to. I told them about the Tanaka project, about the work I'd done, about Marcus. I didn't tell them about Renata, not yet. That felt like a thing too close to hold, a thing too tender to put into the air of this place. But I told them about the conference room, about the first person singular, about standing in the hallway afterward saying thanks to the man who'd just taken something from me. "What did you do after that?" Bethany asked. She asked with the directness of a project manager, without judgment, just information gathering. "Nothing," I said. "I just went home." She looked at me for a moment with the assessment of someone who manages projects for a living and has developed opinions about what failure modes look like. "That's not nothing," she said. "That's a choice." "Yeah, well, it didn't feel like a choice." "Well, that's what choices feel like when we're afraid of them," she said simply. And then she went back to examining the emergency kit. The conversation moved on. And I sat with what she'd said in the manner of someone who'd just been handed something breakable and is not yet sure how to hold it. By mid-afternoon, the cloud cover had thickened and the light had taken on the flat, pressurized quality that precedes weather. Priya watched the sky with the attention of someone who reads it for information and didn't look reassured by what she read. Gordon watched it with the same attention and said only, "Job's picking up." He was right. The Pacific, which had been running a long, slow, deep swell since the morning, the kind of swell that carries no aggression, just the vast energy of open ocean in motion, had began to sharpen. The intervals between swells had shortened. The peaks developed a frilled edge, not whitecaps yet, but the suggestion of those whitecaps. The linked wreckage cluster moved more purposefully, rising and falling with an increased urgency that made the lashing connections between sections creak and pull on each other. "We need to tighten these connections," I said. Gordon was already moving. We spent an hour in the rising chop doing structural maintenance on our floating community, reinforcing the lashings, adding secondary connections where we could find material. Pry and I worked the water side while Gordon managed the central structural evaluation with the expertise of a man who'd once kept a disabled helicopter together with improvised field engineering for 6 hours in a mountain pass in the Kunar province, which he had mentioned not as to boast, but as an explanation for why he knew what he was doing. It was during this work, while I was in the water beside Priya, threading a strip of seat upholstery through a gap in the fuselage section to create a secondary connection point, that I felt it again. The thermal shift first, a column of water against my leg that was directly colder than the surrounding surface temperature, not the ordinary cold of depth source current, but something actively cold, something that suggested of a mass of water displaced from a very great depth very recently, pushed upward by the passage of something enormous moving quickly beneath it. Then the pressure wave came. Smaller than the night before, more distant maybe, or the creature rising more cautiously in the daylight, but it was unmistakable. The water around me compressing briefly and then releasing like a slow, deliberate pulse. I looked at Priya. She was already looking at me. "I feel it," she said. We pulled ourselves back onto the wreckage quickly. I didn't tell the others what we felt, but Gordon looked at me when I came up over the edge and something passed between us. The recognition of two people who have processed the same information, arriving at the same conclusion, and are currently deciding whether to say it. We didn't say it. We finished reinforcing the connections in silence. The chop continued to build, the sky growing darker, and the night came for the second time, and it brought everything else with it. The storm, when it arrived, was not catastrophic, not the full tropical violence that the South Pacific is capable of, not the system-level fury of a named cyclone, but a solid, determined Pacific squall that ran through us for 3 hours sometime after midnight and left us battered and soaked and clinging to our wreckage with a grip strength that by morning had left my forearms shaking from exhaustion. The waves reached 6 or 7 feet at their peak. Significant when your vessel is a section of aircraft debris with 18 inches of freeboard, and twice the lashing connections between sections failed and had to be reestablished, which meant someone going into the water in the middle of a storm, in the middle of the night, to retrieve a stretched section and reconstruct it, while the waves were pushing at them from every direction. Gordon had gone in both times. Neither time did he ask whether someone else wanted to go. He simply went, because he was the kind of man who goes. And when I protested the second time, he looked at me with the calm irritation of someone whose competence is being questioned in an inconvenient moment, and said, "Drake, hold this." And he went in. Beneath the storm, and this is the part I gotta tell you, because this is the part I've turned over in my mind in the months since, examining it from every angle, the way you examine something you're not sure is real. But beneath the storm, it was active. Not aggressing, not attacking, but present in a way that was different from the watchful circling of the first night. It was more purposeful, more interested. The pressure waves came more frequently, every 20 minutes instead of 40, then every 10. The intervals were tightening in a way that suggested acceleration, something that had been patient becoming less patient, something that had been once observing deciding to engage more closely. Between the waves I could feel, and I want to be precise here because precision is the only tool I have left for this, I could feel the living quality of the water. The difference between water that is simply water and water that is in proximity to something that is alive. It's a quality that I don't have language for except to say that the water felt aware, felt inhabited, felt like the surface of something that breathed. The storm passed, the waves dropped back to their long dark swells. The sky above us cleared partially and stars appeared in the gaps. Brilliant and cold and indifferent, the ancient light of things so far away that the word far stops meaning what it means. And Gordon said, "Something just touched the wreckage." His section, the one on the outer edge of the cluster furthest from the center, the one he'd been working from all night. He said it in a tone of pure informational precision, not of fear, not of alarm, but the voice of someone reporting a data point while their brain catches up to what that data means. We all went still. "Touched it how?" I said. "From below," he said. "Just light contact. Exploratory." A silence. The water breathed. "Gordon," I said, "can you move toward the center? Toward Bethany and Carson's section?" He was already moving, carefully, redistributing his weight across the lashing connections, working toward the center of the cluster with the patience of a man navigating a minefield. He was halfway there when the section he'd vacated, the outer section, the furthest one from the center, disappeared. Not dramatically, not torn away, not smashed, just gone. The lashing connection between it and the main cluster went suddenly slack, and when I looked toward where it had been, there was just water. The section had been pulled down from beneath. "Okay," Gordon said very quietly from his position halfway between where he'd been and the center. "Okay." He finished moving toward the center and settled his weight on Bethany's section and looked at me. "We're going to need to reevaluate this cluster configuration," he said. "Yeah," I said. "We've got our largest exterior section. We've just lost it." "I know." "We should pull in," Bethany said. She was already assessing, already calculating. "Make the cluster smaller, denser, less surface area." "Less surface area above the water," Price said, "means more weight per square foot. Some of the pieces won't support that." "Which ones?" "Well, mine and Wyatt's. They'll need to support fewer people between them." We rearranged ourselves in the dark, quickly and quietly as we could, shifting weight, connecting points, and reconfiguring our small floating civilization into a tighter, denser, more defensible formation. Carson ended up next to me, and I was aware of his shaking. It had never fully stopped, and of Gordon on the far side anchoring the configuration with his weight, his deliberate stillness. 5 people on one piece of wreckage smaller than the last. Something vast and ancient in the water beneath us was patient in the way that things are patient when they've never had to rush. They've existed far outside of time's ordinary pressures, that urgency is a concept they've never needed to develop. And then Priya said in the quietest voice that I've ever heard her use, "Don't move. Don't anyone move." I turned my head slowly in the direction of her gaze. The Leviathan had surfaced. Not partially, not the exploratory near-surface presence of the previous night. It had risen until a section of its body, a section, mind you, one portion of it, not its entirety, which remained below the surface on both sides of the visible section and extended to lengths I couldn't estimate in the dark. That section had broke the surface of the water and lay there in the starlight, 40 feet from us, maybe 50, but close enough to see. Close enough to see the geometry of it, the patterns I'd glimpsed on the first night. They were now in a visibly better light, and they were not random, they were not animal. They were structural in a way that bypassed my aesthetic processing and hit something deeper, something that registered pattern as a form of intelligence before the conscious mind catches up. The surface was the black of deep water and the dark of deep time, and it moved faintly, with the slow rhythm of something breathing in a way that suggested lungs of a different kind entirely. Vast bellows, drawing in the ocean itself, tasting the surface world that it had never visited. Its eye was visible. One eye, the one facing us, roughly 12 feet across, which is a sentence I have written and erased and rewritten 100 times, because there's no way to write it that prepares you for it. An eye 12 feet in diameter. It was not the blank, lightless eye of a deep sea creature adapted to darkness. It was lit from within, with a phosphorescent cold light that was the color of deep water and the color of something burning at a temperature so extreme that it passed through red and orange and yellow and come out the other side, and it was open, and it was looking directly at us. It was looking at us with the specific, assessing attention of something that wants, desires. That's the word for it. Want. The word that I've come back to every time because it's the most disturbing word of all. More disturbing than the size, and more disturbing than the fire, and more disturbing than the geometry of the surface. The eye was hungry. Not for meat, or not only for meat, but with the deeper, more unsettling hunger of something that has been alone for a very long time and has found here on the surface of its world something novel, something new, something that has arrived from the world above the water, from the 5%, from the place where light lives. And the hunger in that eye, I recognized it. God help me, I recognized it. It was the same hunger that lived in my chest. The cold, dark, patient, consuming hunger that wanted what it didn't have and couldn't bear that someone else might have it. The hunger that turned love into suspicion and work into competition and every good thing into a threatening thing. The hunger that had been carrying for 3 months like a stone in my sternum, that I dressed up in the respectable clothing of concern and reasonable worry and professional awareness so I didn't have to call it what it was. Envy, ancient and bottomless and self-consuming, the hunger that feeds on itself and grows. Leviathan. The eye held us for a long, terrible moment, and then with a slowness that was somehow worse than speed, it sank. The enormous section of the visible body slid back beneath the surface with a grace that its size had no business possessing, like watching a continent decide to be an ocean floor again. The water closed over it. The phosphorescent wake bloomed green and white and faded. We sat in the dark and nobody breathed. And then Gordon said in the voice of a man who's made a decision, "At first light, whatever the first thing that floats near us that we can use, we make a signal. We make the biggest damn signal we can make and we keep it burning. And if nothing comes by the end of the third day, we start talking about swimming." "Swimming? Where?" Carson said. "Any direction," Gordon said. "Any direction is better than here." I looked at the water where the eye had been. Any direction, I thought. Any direction but down. They came for Gordon at 4 a.m. Not a second warning, not another exploratory contact. It, came with the decisiveness of something that has finished being curious and has made a determination. Gordon's section of wreckage was on the outer edge of our reconfigured cluster, because Gordon's weight was the anchor, because Gordon was the structural logic of our arrangement, and whatever moved beneath us understood the way certain predators understand which member of a group is load-bearing. I was half conscious when it happened, not asleep. I hadn't slept, I couldn't sleep. But in the grade disassociative state between wakefulness and sleep, where the mind runs on reduced power, processing less, filtering less, I heard the sound first. Not the sound of the creature, which moved without sound in the water, but the sound of the wreckage. The deep structural groan of composite material under a sudden enormous upward force. Then I heard Gordon's voice, 2 words, both calm, both final, in the way of a man who's translating the situation in the most efficiently possible signal. "It's here!" And then the outer section went under. Gordon went in with it. The water closed, and then there was nothing. No thrashing, no crying, no final sound, just the water accepting him the way the water accepts everything, completely, without apology. We all screamed. Carson screamed. Bethany made a sound I don't have a word for. I was in the water before I decided to be, reaching into the dark below the surface, reaching for a hand, a sleeve, anything, and finding only the cold and dark and the pressure of something enormous moving away below me, taking Gordon, his unborn grandchild, his military pragmatism, his 2 flares, and his calm, deliberate, irreplaceable competence down into the 3 miles of the dark. Priya pulled me back up, both hands on my collar, hauling me in with the strength that she'd developed swimming above coral reefs in Western Australia, the strength of a woman who'd spent her life in the water and knows what it costs to lose someone to it. "He's gone," she said, not cruelly, the way she said everything, accurately. I clung to the edge of the wreckage and looked at the water where Gordon had been, and felt the loss of him the way that you feel the loss of something structural. Not just grief, but the vertiginous awareness that a thing which was holding everything else up is no longer there. The thing that was holding it, everything was now falling. 4 of us. No flares, no more military expertise, no patients that had survived 2 wars and a helicopter crash. The water beneath us moved and breathed. And below us, 3 miles down in the dark that has never been seen, the Leviathan turned and looked back up at the surface, at the small warm shape still floating above it, at the light we represented, our heat, our noise, our terrified human vitality, and it looked with its ancient, cold, consuming hunger, wanting, desiring, always wanting. And I thought, clinging to the piece of fuselage in the dark before the 3rd day, I know what you are. I know exactly what you are. And I know what it costs. This is Leviathan, what swims beneath the skin of the world. Part 3, what the deep knows. There's a theological argument that's old, contested, yet never fully resolved, about whether the 7 deadly sins are 7 separate things or 7 expressions of one singular thing: lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, pride, envy. The medieval church organized them hierarchically. Pride is the apex, the root sin, the sin from which all others grew. Dante arranged them in his purgatory as a mountain to be climbed, each level a sin to be purged before the soul could ascend. Pride was at the base, and envy on that second terrace just above it. Pride is the foundation. Envy, the first fruit of pride, the natural consequence of a self so invested in its own worth that the worth of others becomes intolerable. But there's another reading in which envy is not the child of pride, but rather its twin, in which the two are not parent and offspring, but two faces of the same disfigurement. Pride saying, I am more, and envy saying, they have what should be mine. Both statements issuing from the same wound, the same fundamental failure to be at peace with the terms of one's own existence. And I had a lot of time to think about that on the third morning. Gordon had been gone for 2 hours. The sky had begun its reluctant brightening, that same gray pewter color arrival of light that had been characterized by the second morning, as though the sun were ashamed to look directly at what the Pacific had done and was approaching it sideways. The four of us that remained were arranged on what was left of our cluster, 2 main sections now lashed together, my piece and Bethany's rebuilt cushion platform, and the remaining section of seat track housing that Priya had been using. The cluster was smaller and lower in the water than it had been, not catastrophically, but enough to register, enough to feel the difference between the night before and now, enough to feel that we were running out of things to lose. Carson had not spoken since Gordon, not a word, not since the screaming had stopped. He sat on Bethany's section with his knees pulled to his chest, his eyes fixed on the middle distance with the particular vacancy of a young man whose nervous system has filed a report and is waiting for the rest of his brain to process it. Bethany sat beside him, not touching him, but close, maintaining proximity the way you maintain proximity to something fragile, with a care that doesn't announce itself. Priya sat beside me on my section, and we talked. We talked because talking was the only thing we could do for Gordon now, not for his memory that would come later, in the world above the horizon, if we made it there. But no, we were talking for ourselves, the kind of talking that was a structure, a kind of insistence that we were still here, still thinking, still in possession of the faculties that differentiated us from the things that happened to us. The pattern, I said. It took the outer section both times, the most exposed piece. Yes, Priya said. It's methodical. Yes. That's not predatory instinct, I said. That's not ambush behavior, that's strategic, she said. The word sat between us. Strategic, implying calculation, implying something that looked at our cluster and understood its structure, targeted its weakness, implying a mind. How intelligent, I said. Not a full sentence. She understood it. She was quiet for a moment, the precise, measured quietness of someone assembling what they know and what they're willing to say. The largest known cetaceans have demonstrated problem-solving, tool use, cultural transmission of learned behaviors across generations, she said. Sperm whales have a region of the brain with no identified analog in other species. Giant squid have nervous systems of extraordinary complexity, and those are species we know about. The ones that surface, the ones that come within range of observation. She paused. Whatever is beneath us has been below that range of observation for, geological time, millions of years, in an environment where the selective pressures are collectively and completely different from anything we've ever studied, where the ocean's darkness would put extraordinary pressure on non-visual intelligence, on spatial reasoning, on an understanding of the world through pressure and current and vibration. Another pause. There is no reason, none, to assume that something has existed for that long in those conditions will be less intelligent than we are. Well, there's a reason to assume it might be more, I said. Yes, she said quietly. There is. The water beneath us performed its slow ceremony. The surface shift, the pressure wave, the debris field turning, the Leviathan and its patient circling. Closer now, the intervals shorter, the pressure signatures larger and more distinct, as though it had been deciding that the time of subtlety had passed, as though it had assessed us and found us diminished, and was adjusting its approach accordingly. It knew Gordon was gone, I was certain of that. Whatever senses it used to map the world, pressure, vibration, thermal, electromagnetic, senses we don't have names for because we never needed to develop them above the 5% where we lived. It knew that one of those 5 warm shapes on its surface had been removed, and it was recalibrating. It was recalibrating the way an intelligent thing recalibrates. I want to talk about the Tuesday after the conference room incident. The Tuesday 3 days before the plane departed from Portland. I'd spent the intervening days in a state of interior weather so turbulent, so constant, I began to lose the distinction between what I was feeling and what I was thinking. The emotions had colonized my cognition so thoroughly, I could no longer construct a clear thought about the Marcus situation, the Renata situation, or the question of what I was going to do about either without that cold, dark thing immediately flooding it, drowning it in its own particular logic. Everything looked like evidence. Everything felt like betrayal. The world had taken on the specific awful texture of a place that was managed by an enemy. And I had done the thing that people in that state almost always do, which is the thing most guaranteed to make it worse. I looked at Renata's phone. Not systematically, not a planned investigation, but a moment of opportunity when she'd left it on the kitchen counter while she went to answer the door. The screen was still lit. The most recent notification was visible. It was a text, and the preview showed 3 words on it before it dimmed. 3 words I had seen without intending to. Can't wait to. The contact name was visible too. Just a first name. Marcus. 3 words in the name, and the cold dark thing had taken them and built a cathedral out of them. A vast, vaulted, elaborately detailed cathedral of implication, accusation, certainty. All from 3 words in the name, all in 6 seconds before Renata came back to the kitchen. I said nothing. She'd pick up the phone, glanced at whatever the notification was, typed something brief, set it down again, and gone back to whatever she was doing. Her face gave me nothing, but by then my faculty for reading her face without distortion had been compromised for weeks. I couldn't trust my own perception. I knew I couldn't trust it. And knowing you can't trust your own perception while simultaneously being unable to stop using it, it's one of those more exquisite tortures available in the human mind. And I had said nothing. That night I had lain awake next to her. She'd been asleep for about an hour on her side, facing away from me. She always did that. She'd always done, and simply how she slept, and had never once signified anything. And I stared at the ceiling of our bedroom in the Craftsman bungalow and conducted the trial. In my head, in the dark, with no jury and no defense, I had tried that case, presented the evidence, and I had already reached a verdict. All in the space of 2 hours, while the woman I loved slept 12 inches away from me, entirely ignorant of what was happening on the other side of the bed. The evidence, the rooftop party, the laugh, the text notification, and the name, the way she'd said that thing Marcus does, as though his habits were familiar. The fact that she'd looked slightly too composed when I'd mentioned him, which meant she was managing her reaction, which meant there was something to manage there. The fact that she'd looked too slightly natural when I mentioned him on another occasion, which meant she was performing naturalness, which meant, you see how this works? You see the spiral, the machine of it? How it converts every input into the same output. How innocence and guilt produce identical evidence inside the architecture of envy. Because the architecture of envy is not designed to evaluate. It's designed to convict. I had reached my verdict somewhere around 2 a.m. And then I'd lain there with the verdict and felt the absolute desolation of it. Not the satisfaction of having figured something out, discovered something, not even the sharp, clean pain of genuine betrayal, but that hollow, nauseating awareness that I might have manufactured the entire cathedral from 3 words and a name, and the hunger of my own insecurity. That I was a man lying awake beside someone he loved, destroying what he had with his bare hands through his own mind, and the destruction was the only thing he could think of to do with fear. I'd never told Renata any of this. I got up the next morning, made coffee, handed her a mug, and sat with her on the back porch while Copernicus moved through the yard. She held the mug with both hands, thumbs overlapping. Said something about the gallery show, something about the weather turning, and I sat there with that verdict still warm in my chest and the cold, dark thing drinking its breakfast, and I said nothing. And 3 days later, I was on the plane. 3 days later, I was in the water. The flashback released me back into the gray third morning. I found Priya watching me with the attentiveness of someone who's learned to read the silences of people around them. "You were somewhere else," she said. "Home," I said, which was both true and not true, the way most things were by then. "Tell me about home," she said. It was not therapeutic, practical, information gathering, the same way she gathered everything, understanding what she needed to understand the man she was surviving with. So I told her, not the verdict, not the cathedral, not the trial. I wasn't ready for all of that yet, and the third morning on the open Pacific, that was not the time or place for it, but I told her about Renata, about the clay and the eucalyptus smell, the laugh that reached her eyes, the back porch and the coffee, and Copernicus conducting his daily survey of the yard, about the bungalow I'd been slowly, lovingly rebuilding, the original windows I'd restored, the floors I'd refinished, the kitchen I'd redesigned, all of it done with a care that was more than about property value. It was about the investment of a man who believed in this place, and I was making it home. I wanted it to be worthy of the life that I was putting into it. "She sounds like someone worth getting back to," Priya said. "She is," I said. "And the colleague, Marcus." "Marcus." She said the name simply without inflection. "What are you going to do about Marcus?" I looked at the water, the flat gray Pacific morning, the long dark swells, the pieces of debris from the aircraft still scattered across the surface and a radius around us, turning slowly in whatever current had us. Foam, luggage, the sad flotsam of 63 interrupted lives. "I don't know," I said. "I'll say something, I suppose. Have the conversation I should have had 3 months ago. Tell him clearly that the work is mine, that I expect that to be reflected in how it's presented." I paused. "If I get back." "When?" Priya said without emphasis. "When I get back." "And Renata?" I was quiet for a long time. A swell lifted us and set us down. "Trust her?" I said finally. "Stop the trial, stop collecting evidence for a verdict I decided before the evidence was in." I paused. "I've been doing to her what Marcus has been doing to me in a way. Taking something and remaking it into my own image without her permission. Taking her love and reframing it as something suspect. Taking her loyalty and prosecuting it." The words came out slowly with the specific resistance of things that have been kept in for too long. That's the thing about envy. It doesn't stay in one place. You let it in for one reason and it moves through the whole house. Priya was quiet for a moment, then, "That's a very self-aware thing to say for someone who's been awake for 60 hours on a piece of aircraft." "Yeah, well, I've had a lot of time to sit here and think it over." "We all do. We all have time here." She looked out at the water. I think the creature knows it. I turned to her. Knows what? What we're all carrying, she said. What each of us has. Gordon had his grief. His wife died 3 years ago. He told me while you were sleeping that first afternoon he'd never found a way to carry it. That just didn't hollow him out, he said. That's what he told me. He talked about the grandbaby as though it were the only light he still has on in the house. She paused. Carson has his guilt about the friend who died, about being the one who didn't know how bad it was, about still being alive and going on the trip anyways. She paused again. Bethany has her failure, the marriage she couldn't save, the life she hadn't made her own yet. She booked that solo vacation because she realized she'd stopped knowing who she was without someone else providing the structure. And me? I asked. You have your hunger, she said simply. The wanting that became consuming. The love that became surveillance. She looked at me steadily. The envy. And you, I said after a moment, what do you have? She smiled briefly, the first smile I'd seen from her, small, slightly painful. Well, ambition that's become isolation, she said. The work became the only real relationship I had. And at some point the work stopped being enough, and I didn't know how to fix that. So I went further into the work. 10 years of field work, and I can count the people I'm genuinely close to on one hand, and I've still got fingers left over. She looked out at the water. 5 years studying coral reefs. I have an intimate understanding of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. And I am profoundly alone. Pride, I said. She raised an eyebrow. That's your sin, I said. Not judgment, just Dante's mountain. Pride, then envy, then sloth. She said quietly. The failure to move toward what matters. We both looked at each other. On the gray thing, on that third morning, two damaged and frightened and increasingly clear-eyed people floating on the debris of their interrupted lives, and something passed between us. I don't know I have a precise word for it or not. Not romantic. This was not that. The water was not a place for that, even if it had been. It was the recognition that passes between two people who have told each other true things, which is rarer and more valuable than almost any other form of human exchange. If it knows what we carry, I said, then it's not just a predator. No, she said, it's not just a predator. What is it? She looked at the water, long, the way she always looked at things when she was about to say something careful. In the deepest trenches, she said, where the pressure is enough to crush a submarine, where there's no light and no warmth and no food source that we can readily identify. Somehow, life exists, not despite the conditions, but because of them. Things have evolved to fill every possible niche, to turn every possible form of energy into life. Heat from hydrothermal vents, chemical energy from methane seeps. She paused. What if there is something that feeds on a different kind of energy? Not thermal, not chemical. Something that, in a way that certain deep-sea creatures can detect the faintest electrical fields of other organisms. They can detect those fields generated by certain kinds of human psychology, maybe? By the particular emotional frequencies of envy, I said. Of all sins, she said. But perhaps envy most of all, because envy is the hungriest, because it generates the most energy, because it's the most constant, the most self-sustaining, the most... She stopped. The most like something that lives in the dark. Yes, she said. The most like something that lives in the dark. We sat there with that for a while, the water breathing. Well, then it found us, I said. Not because of the crash, not because we happened to come down its territory. Oh, it found us, she said. It found us because of what we're carrying. It smells us, I said. From 3 miles down, she said. Yeah. Carson broke at mid-morning. Not suddenly. Nothing breaks suddenly, not really. What looks like a sudden break is always the visible endpoint of a process that's been happening invisibly for a long time. The crack that appears in the wall being the final announcement of a structural failure that was weeks in the making. Carson had been failing since the first night. The shaking had never stopped, not fully, not even when the surface was calm and the creature was at depth and there was technically nothing immediately threatening and visible. The shaking was not fear anymore. It had become something more systemic, the body's continuous processing of an overload that the mind was refusing to acknowledge. He went into the water without warning, not jumped, didn't stand, didn't announce anything. Simply rolled off the edge of Bethany's cushioned platform in one fluid motion, the way a sleeper rolls over, the way a body does something the mind hasn't fully approved yet. He was in the water, 4 feet from the edge of the wreckage before any of us understood what was happening. And by the time that I was reaching over the other side, he was 10 feet out, face down, not swimming, just floating, just lying there, face down in the Pacific Ocean in the attitude of a man who's decided, at least for this moment, not to fight the water. Carson! I reached. He was too far. Carson, look at me! He turned his head slightly, his face half submerged. It was almost peaceful. The shaking had stopped. That was the most frightening thing. The shaking that had been his constant for 60 hours had simply ceased, as though he'd reached a decision that resolved the physical conflict. She said, "You're okay, honey," he said, the water filling his mouth slightly on the words. He turned his face away, then back. She just kept saying it. She was still saying it when the water... He stopped. She was trying to help me. She died trying to help me. I know, I said. Carson, just give me your hand. I just keep thinking about Jake, he said. Jake, his friend from Columbus, the one who the trip was for, the one who died in the spring. I keep thinking Jake would have been better at this. Jake was brave. He was the brave one. I was always the one who... Carson! Bethany's voice beside me, cutting through with a precision that I've always believed saved his life in that moment. Not warm, not pleading, precise. Carson Reeve, look at me right now. He looked at her. You are 22 years old, she said. You have been in the South Pacific Ocean on a piece of aircraft for 2 nights, and you have not let go once. You've not let go once. She held his gaze with a steadiness I found extraordinary. Jake would have been proud of that. Whatever you think of yourself, whatever you've decided about who's brave and who isn't, you have been here. You have been here every single minute. A long silence. The water moved. Something deep and cold shifted beneath us, and I felt it through the whole of the wreckage, and I looked at Priya. She had felt it also. Give me your hand, I said to Carson, quietly but urgently. He reached up. I grabbed his wrist with both hands and pulled, and Bethany grabbed my belt to anchor me. Carson came up over the edge of the wreckage with the weight and the limpness of someone who's genuinely used everything they have and is just running on reserves and they don't quite believe are even still there. He sat on the cushioned platform and breathed. Bethany sat beside him and put her arm around his shoulders, which surprised me. She was not, I had thought, a person who was touchy. But Carson leaned into it, and they sat like that for a while the third morning as it continued its gray and different progression. Priya was beside me, and she said nothing, but her hand was on my arm. She was looking at the water with the expression that I had come to recognize as her professional face meeting something that her profession had not prepared her for. "It came closer just now," she said very quietly, only so I could hear. "I know." "When he went in the water." "I know." I kept my voice low. "I think it responded to him. Yeah, to what he was feeling," she said. "To the guilt," I said. It feeds on all of it," she said. "All the sins, but ours most. Yours." She looked at me. "Whatever it is, whatever this thing has been doing in the deep for however long, it's been drawn here by something it recognizes, something it resonates with, something it finds familiar." She paused. "Wyatt, it's going to come for Carson next. I think it's been working from the outside in. Most exposed first, most spiritually exposed." That's not a scientific. "No," she said, it isn't." I looked at Carson, small, wet, breathing on his own cushion, Bethany's arm around him. "Then we keep him in the center," I said. "We put him in the center and we just keep him there." The third afternoon was the clearest sky we'd had, the clouds finally breaking up, the sun appearing for the first time since the crash and hitting the Pacific with the full force of a South Pacific afternoon, which was both genuinely warming and faintly cruel, the beautiful indifference of weather. We used the mirror that Carson had found, and we used it systematically, Priya running the signaling protocol with the methodical regularity of someone who had done search and rescue training, sweeping the horizon in quadrants, flash, flash, pause. The intentional distress signal again and again into the empty blue afternoon. Flash, flash, pause. Nothing answered. I helped, Bethany helped. Carson, wrapped in the space blanket, watched the horizon with a new quality of attention. Not the blank vacancy of his morning break, but something more present, more directed, as though Bethany's words had reached something that needed reaching and woken up in him. We talked about rescue, actively, specifically, and the way you talk about something when you need to believe in it. The flight plan, the ELT, the fact that Meridian Pacific's operations team would have flagged the missed check-in and initiated the protocol within 2 hours of the flight going dark. The fact that the U.S. Navy maintained its assets through the Pacific Basin. The fact that Australian Maritime Search and Rescue covered this general region under international agreement. The fact that we had been in the water for, Bethany calculated it with the precision she'd applied to everything, 61 hours, which was long and bad and not yet unsurvivable, which was not a great sentence to have to construct, but it was the sentence we had. Priya didn't participate in the rescue conversation. She sat at the edge of the wreckage, and she looked at the water and took readings in the way of someone who has no instruments and is using only what their nervous system and their expertise can tell them. Occasionally she would look at me and I would look at her, and we would communicate the thing that we were not saying in front of Carson and Bethany. The creature had not gone deep. It had been staying shallow all day, holding at a depth that she estimated from pressure signatures, from thermal differentials, from behavior of the surface above it, at no more than 200 or 300 feet, way up from the miles deep domain where it had begun, rising incrementally acclimating, the way a diver acclimates to depth by stages. It was coming closer. At 3:07 p.m. on the third day, I know the time because Bethany had a waterproof watch and had been tracking time with the systemic faith of someone who believes that knowing the exact moment of things is a form of control over them. The Leviathan was visible from the surface in full daylight for the first time. Not as close as the night that I got a look at his eye. Not as clear as I would have wished or dreaded or both. It was 20 feet below the surface, visible through the water the way something visible through frosted glass is visible. Its outline, its size, readable without the full resolution of detail, which was simultaneously a mercy and a refinement of terror, because you could see the size without seeing the particulars, and the size, visible in daylight and the full revealing cruelty of the Pacific afternoon, was something my mind could not wholly process and simply rerouted around, filed under an internal category that I can only describe as the thing I will think about later when I am somewhere else. It was longer than the aircraft that had brought us here. I mean, significantly longer. It lay below us, not directly below, but at an angle, its body oriented northeast-southwest, its near end visible beneath our position, and its far end disappearing into the deeper blue beyond the visible range of the daylight penetrating water. It was not moving. It was utterly still, in the way that only things that are confident in their power can afford to be utterly still, the way a mountain is still, the way the bottom of the ocean is still. It was looking up at us. I could feel the eye without seeing it clearly. Could feel it in the way you feel a spotlight on your back as a warmth, a pressure, and attention directed at you with enough specificity to register on the skin. The ancient phosphorescent gaze, muted by 20 feet of water and by daylight, but present, always present. The hunger it contained no less vivid for being filtered. Carson saw it first. He made a sound that was not a word, and I looked at where he was looking, and then we all saw it. All four of us, the full light of the third afternoon. Nobody screamed. I think we had moved past the register where screaming was the appropriate response. What we did was what people do when they look at things the scale of which the eye cannot integrate. We became very quiet and very still. And we held on to whatever was nearest to us, and we waited to see what came next. What came next was nothing for approximately 4 minutes. It simply lay there below us, visible and vast and patient, and we sat above it on our shrinking collection of wreckage, and the Pacific was blue, and the sky was clear, and the sun was warm, and the world was perfectly, savagely beautiful. None of it, though, was on our side. Then it moved. Not toward us, but down and away. A deep, slow arc, the body curving with a grace that was genuinely, horrifically beautiful. The geometry of its surface catching the light as it turned and producing a brief, complex interference pattern in the water above it, prismatic and cold, like light through the world's oldest stained glass. It went down and it went away in 30 seconds that it was gone. Below the threshold of visible and the water above it settled, and the afternoon continued. "It's just playing with us," Carson said, very flatly, very quiet. "No," Priya said. She said it with such conviction that we all looked at her. "It's not playing with us. It's assessing us. It's determining something. And whether we're what it thinks we are, whether what we're carrying is..." She stopped. "Whether we're worth it," Bethany said. "Whether we're what it came up for," Priya said. "It came from 3 miles down," I said. "It came up because of us, because of what we crashed here carrying." I looked at the water. And every time someone lets go of what they're carrying, Carson in the water this morning being pulled back, Gordon facing it in the dark without flinching, I stopped. "Gordon," Priya said slowly. Gordon wasn't the most exposed, not spiritually. He was the most structurally important to us, yes, but in terms of what he was carrying, she thought, the grief. He told me he'd found a way through the grief. He'd said the grandbaby was the light still on in the house. He said he'd stopped being angry about his wife's death, that he'd made his peace with it. She looked at me. He'd let it go. He was the one among us who actually had let it go. And it took him first, I said. The logic of that sat on the wreckage with us, ugly and cold, internally consistent. It took the one who was free, I said, because the ones who are still holding their poison were the ones it wants. I paused. We're the ones it's feeding on. Gordon wasn't. I looked at the water. Gordon wasn't food anymore. What does that make the rest of us? Carson said. Bait, Bethany said with a clean pragmatism that was her particular form of bravery. We're bait. We're keeping it here with what we're carrying. Then just let it go, Carson said. His voice was strange, not desperate, but something adjacent to desperate that had moved through into a place beyond it, into a hard, clear brightness. We just let it go. We stop. It's not that simple, I said. I said it because I knew it wasn't. Knew it from 3 months of trying and failing to put the cold, dark thing down, from every morning I'd woken up deciding to trust, and every evening the machinery had started right back up again. You don't just decide to stop it. It doesn't work that way. Then how does it work? Carson said. And I found I didn't have an answer. Sitting there in the afternoon light above the Leviathan was perhaps the most honest thing I'd ever thought. Night came for the third time. I've described 2 nights in the Pacific, and I don't want to make this one sound familiar by comparison, because the third night had a quality entirely of its own. A quality I can only attribute to the fact that by the third night we all understood what was happening in a way that the first and second nights had not yet made fully available to us. The first night was pure shock. The second night, survival. The third night was something between confrontation and reckoning, and it had a specific quality that all reckonings have. The sensation of something that cannot be postponed arriving on the schedule it is always kept. There were 4 of us. The wreckage was smaller. We had water for perhaps another 12 hours if we rationed aggressively. And the hydration packs Gordon had brought and Gordon had managed they were gone with him, which was a loss, and practical as well as everything else. We had the mirror. We had the space blanket. We had each other, which sounds insufficient, and was, but also was not. Carson was better than the morning, not recovered. I don't think recovery was available to him on that timeline, but present in the particular way that people become present when they've made a decision, when they've arrived at some internal resolution that settles the shaking and clears the eyes. He'd spoken to me in the late afternoon, quietly, out of the earshot of the others, and had said, I'm going to tell his parents, Jake's, when I get home. I've been avoiding them since the funeral. I've been afraid they'd see it in my face, that I knew how bad it was, and I could have said something. I should have said something. He paused. But they deserve to know that he was my best friend, and that I loved him. I think about him every day. They deserve that from me. I've been taking it from them because I was afraid. He said it the way someone says something they've been holding in for a long time, with the relief and the terror of an item finally set down. Okay, I'd said, that's the right thing to do. I know, he said, but I should have already done it. Well, when you get back, I said. When I get back. Something in him settled. Bethany had spoken to Priya that same afternoon in the particular side-by-side configuration of women talking about something real. Not face to face, which is confrontational, but side by side, looking at the same thing, which is companionable. I hadn't heard what was said, but when they separated, Bethany's posture had changed. In a subtle but unmistakable way, posture changes when something has been braced and finally releases. She sat down for a while with her eyes closed and her face tipped slightly toward the sun. And she looked in that moment like someone who had put something down and was feeling the freedom of empty hands. Priya and I had not yet had the conversation I knew we were moving toward. I could feel it in the way you feel weather. It wasn't here yet, but it was on its way. And the sky had that particular pregnant quality. It came after dark, an hour into the third night, when the creature had begun its ceremony. We'd all felt it and settled into our positions with the practiced adjustment of people who have learned the choreography of their own threat. "Tell me what you haven't said," Priya said. I looked at the water. "About Renata?" "Yeah." I told her about the rooftop party, about the 3 months, about the conference room and the hallway, and the verdict reached at 2 a.m. while Renata slept 12 inches away. I told her about the text notifications, 3 words and a name, and about what the machinery had done with it. I told her about the last morning on the back porch, the performance of presence while the hunger ran its calculations in the background. I told her all of it, the whole ugly detailed cathedral of it, floating on the third night in the Pacific with the Leviathan below us, and it was the most honest I had been with another person, about myself, about my failures, and longer than I could account for. When I finished, there was a silence, the good kind. The kind that means someone is taking what you said seriously enough to not immediately feel it. "Do you know what Marcus's full text said?" Priya asked finally. "No," I said. "Do you know that it was Marcus's text?" I thought about it. "No, just a name, Marcus." I paused. "There are other Marcuses in the world." "Yeah," she said, "there are. But even if it was him, she said, "you built a cathedral." "Yeah," I said, I did. "And you prosecuted her without a defense." "Yeah." "And you called it love," she said, not harshly, precisely. I looked at the water, at the phosphorescent suggestion of the creature below, its cold light dimly visible at depth, its presence as constant and patient as weather. "That's what it feeds on," I said. "The specific thing, the love that became surveillance, the love that couldn't sustain itself without devouring what I loved." I paused. "That's the definition of envy, actually, the theological one. Not just wanting what other has, but wanting to possess what you love so completely that the possession ultimately destroys it." I looked at the water. "Envy is the sin that hates the thing it loves. It wants the good thing so badly that it tears the good thing apart by trying to own it." "And the Leviathan," Priya said. "It's not a creature," I said. It arrived as a certainty, not a hypothesis. The kind of certainty that sometimes comes after long enough in the dark. "It's not only a creature. It's what envy looks like when it's 3 miles deep and geologically old and has been feeding on the accumulated hunger of the world since before the world had a name." I stopped. "We've been generating it since we were capable of wanting things. Every moment of wanting what someone else has, every act of taking credit, every verdict reached without evidence, every love turned into surveillance." I looked back at the water. "It's all down there. All of it. And the creature is what it becomes when it has enough. When it has had enough centuries of it to become something with mass. Something with an eye." Priya was quiet for a long time. "Then the only way to fight it," she said, "is to put it down." I said, "Whatever we're carrying, put it down. And if we can't," I looked at the water, "then we feed it," I said, "until there's nothing left to take." The attack came at midnight. I have tried to write this section more times than I can count, and I failed every time because the event itself resists the linearity of a narrative that it requires. What happened at midnight on the third night happened in approximately 90 seconds, and within those 90 seconds contained more information, sensory, emotional, physical, than my mind has ever been asked to process in a comparable interval. And the result is that my memory of it is not linear, it's layered. It's a series of simultaneous truths that I experience all at once every time I return to it, and can only present here in sequence because that's just the nature of language. The pressure wave came first, the largest we had felt. The surface went briefly vertical around the perimeter of the cluster, a ring of standing water encircling us like a momentary wall, and then collapsed back flat with a sound like the world cleared its throat. Then the eye. Not 20 feet below the surface, not at the surface in the careful exploratory way of the second night. Directly beside the wreckage cluster, level with the surface, close enough that the phosphorescent light of it fell across us like a searchlight, cold and blue-green and ancient, illuminating our small, terrible situation with the disinterested thoroughness of a spotlight on a stage. Carson grabbed my arm. Bethany's hands found the lashing connection of the wreckage and held on. Priya went completely still in the way of someone who has decided that perfect stillness is a decision rather than an absence of decision. The eye was there, 12 feet across, 10 feet from the edge of the cluster, lit from within with the cold fire of something burning at geological temperature, looking at us with the hunger that I recognized, that I now understood was not metaphor, not projection. It was the literal reality of an ancient appetite that I carried a version of in my own chest every single day. It looked at us one by one. I felt this as a pressure, a directional attention that moved from person to person with an intention so clear it bypassed ambiguity entirely. It looked at Bethany. She made a sound, small and involuntary. It looked at Carson, and he gripped my arm harder. It looked at Priya, and she closed her eyes. And then it looked at me. I want to tell you about being looked at by the Leviathan. I want to tell you that I was brave, that I met its gaze with courage that my name implies, that I stared back into that ancient phosphorescent eye without flinching and felt nothing but clarity. But the truth is messier and more important than that. The truth is when it looked at me, I felt recognized. I felt seen in the specific, terrible way that only the thing that knows you best can see you. It looked at me, and I felt the cold, dark thing in my chest respond. The hunger I'd been carrying for 3 months rising to meet the hunger in that eye, the way a tuning fork responds to a frequency it shares. The two systems resonating, the frequency building between us. It knew me. It had come up from 3 miles down because it knew me. And in the moment of that recognition, I understood, with a clarity that was also a kind of devastation, the full cost of what I'd been carrying, not just the damage to myself, not just the damage to Renata, not just the theft of my own peace, but the full theological cost. The way envy, left to compound, becomes something that exists in the world as a weight, as a force, as a thing with mass and intention and appetite. The way every act of small, private, self-generated hunger, every verdict reached in the dark, every surveillance of a sleeping lover, every thanks said to a thief in a hallway, contributes something larger than itself. The way the private sins are not private, the way they accumulate, the way they go down, the way they feed on what lives in the dark. The eye held me for 3 seconds that lasted a decade. And then it moved. Fast. Faster than any large thing had any right to move. Faster than the water could respond to. The wave it generated in its lunge came a half second after the impact, which meant the impact itself was almost without warning. A massive upward force against the underside of our outer section of our cluster, Carson's section. Bethany's cushioned platform, the forward edge of the assembly. Bethany went into the water. Not like Gordon, not pulled down cleanly and finally, but thrown sideways. By the wave the impact generated 8 feet through the air and into the open Pacific beside the cluster. She surfaced immediately because Bethany was the kind of person, and she was swimming back toward us before the wave had fully settled. Swimming with the economical, determined strokes of someone who swims not for pleasure, but for transformation. Bethany! I was over the edge. Pride grabbed me. She's swimming. Don't go in. Pride's voice with a force I had not heard from her before. Wyatt, don't go in. Bethany was 15 feet out, swimming hard. Her face was set with the same expression it had worn for 3 days, the face of a project manager assessing the fastest path between the current state and the desired outcome. And she was making progress, and she was going to make it. She was going to make it. The water beneath her went dark. The Leviathan, which had submerged after the impact and had been invisible for 30 seconds of Bethany's swim, was directly beneath her, not moving. Positioned with the terrible patience of something that has learned to wait. The phosphorescent shadow bloomed upward through the water column, the cold light of the eye rising toward the surface, and Bethany felt it. She must have felt the thermal shift, the pressure change, because she stopped swimming just for 1 second. She stopped and looked down through the surface of the water and saw what was below her. And for that 1 second, the last second she had, her face was not the project manager's face. It was something else. It was the face of the woman standing on the back porch in the morning, holding the first solo trip she'd ever booked for herself, feeling the first real ownership of her own life, and understanding that the life she was going to live after this was going to be magnificent. She looked at me. When you get back, she said, tell someone you love them in a way that cost you something. Then the open water took her. The sea closed above her without a ripple. I screamed, I don't know for how long. Priya held me, both arms from behind, the grip of someone preventing a drowning. Carson was saying something I couldn't hear, and the water was perfectly, obscenely still where Bethany had been. The phosphorescent light fading below the surface, retreating to the depths with what it had taken. 3 of us. The wreckage smaller, the night immense, the dark, and the breathing. I don't remember the hours between Bethany's death and the dawn of the 4th day clearly. I have fragments. Carson's voice close and steady talking. I don't remember what about. Priya's hands making the small adjustments of a person managing the structural needs of survival without stopping to feel anything yet. The water, the eternal water, the long dark swells, the phosphorescent traces of the creature's movement below us, visible occasionally through the surface as a cold, faint shimmer, a reminder and a warning and presence. I remember thinking about Bethany, about what she'd said. Tell someone you love them in a way that costs you something. Not the easy kind of love. Not the love that costs you nothing, that you perform without risk and that you execute without dropping your defenses. But the love that costs. The love that requires you to put down what you're holding and stand open-handed in front of someone else's judgment. I had never done that. I had loved Renata in the safe way. The way that kept the exit available, the way that maintained the internal audit, kept the calculation running, preserved the option to retreat behind the verdict if the vulnerability became too much. I'd never stood in front of her and says, this is what I'm afraid of. This is the ugly thing I carry. This is how I have failed to trust you. This is what I need help with. I'd performed the trustworthy partner while conducting the secret prosecution. and the performance had been good enough to fool both of us for 3 years. That was the cost of envy. Not Marcus, not the conference room, not even the cold dark thing itself, which was the symptom. The cost was the love I had not fully given because I had been too afraid that giving it fully meant giving it up. The cost was 3 years of mornings on the back porch with something held back. And the Leviathan below me, ancient and vast and patient, had been feeding on the held back thing, had been feeding on it from 3 miles down, had known before the plane hit the water what it was going to find when it surfaced. I looked at the water. "I see you," I said quietly, not feeling brave, not defiant, just clear, just honest, the way you're honest at the end of something, when the pretenses have been stripped off by 60 hours on the ocean and a creature of geological age eating your companions, and the slow, devastating work of actually understanding what you've been doing your entire life. "I see what you are." The water breathed. "And I know what I have to do," I said. The fourth morning came, 3 of us, the Pacific indifferent and blue, the horizon empty as it had been for 3 days, and on it, at the edge of the horizon, so small I thought it was a mistake, a hallucination generated by hope and dehydration, specific cruelty of the open ocean which shows you things that aren't there. It was a shape, a moving shape, a shape that resolved over the course of 15 minutes that felt like 15 years into a vessel, a ship, an Australian Maritime Patrol vessel as it turned out, responding to the recovered ELT signal from the wreckage of Pacific Meridian Flight 2247, which had been broadcasting for 3 days from a position approximately 400 miles northwest of Vanuatu, which had been complicated to locate because the ELT had sustained damage in the crash and had been transmitting intermittently, which explained the delay, which the rescue coordinator explained to me on the deck of the vessel while I sat wrapped in a thermal blanket drinking the most significant cup of tea in my life. None of this mattered at the moment I saw the shape on the horizon. What mattered at the moment I saw the shape on the horizon was Carson grabbing the mirror and beginning to flash it with the systemic practice motion of someone who's been ready to do this for 3 days. What mattered was Priya making a sound that I'd never heard from her before and I would never forget. A brief, unguarded, wholly unprecise sound, the sound of a person who'd been rigidly managing something for 72 hours and releasing it all at once. What mattered was that I looked at the water one more time before I did anything else. The Leviathan was below us, still there, holding at a depth. It was still watching, but the phosphorescent eye, when I looked through the surface searching for it, seemed dimmer, seemed deeper than it had been, seemed to be slowly, with the patience of something that has all the time to work with, retreating, descending back toward the trench, back toward the basin floor, back toward the dark. Not because it had been defeated, because I had put the thing down, because I had seen it clearly and called it what it was and understood the cost and decided on the gray fourth morning, floating on what was left of the plane above the 95%, that I was done feeding it, that I was going home, that I was going to stand in front of Renata with empty hands and an honest account of what I had been doing in the dark, and that this was going to cost something real, and that real cost was the only currency that mattered. The Leviathan descended, and we flashed the mirror until the ship changed its heading and came towards us. This is Leviathan, what swims beneath the skin of the world. Part 4, what we carry home. They gave me a bunk over the lower deck of the HMAS Bundaberg, a patrol vessel out of Darwin that smelled of diesel and industrial cleaning solution, and the specific institutional saltiness of a working military ship. And I lay in that bunk for 14 hours without sleeping, and stared at the metal ceiling 18 inches above my face, and listened to the engine, and felt the movement of the water beneath the hull, and thought about nothing successfully for the first time in 3 months. Not nothing in the sense of blankness, nothing in the sense of quiet. The specific quiet that comes after something enormous has passed through you and left the air behind it still. The quiet of the room after a storm has gone through it. Disordered, yes. Changed, yes. But also clarified. The way storm-washed air is cleared than what it was before it. My chest, which had housed the cold, dark thing for 3 months with a fidelity that I thought was only now beginning to understand, was a kind of terrible loyalty. It now felt not empty exactly. Emptied of something specific, the way a room feels after you've finally thrown out the furniture that never fit. But the hunger was not gone. And I need to be truthful about that. Because I think the story we prefer, the narrative of the transformative ordeal, the crucible that burns away the dross and leaves only the refined self, is seductive precisely because it is not quite true. And the not quite truth of it is where people begin to get into trouble. The hunger wasn't gone. The cold, dark thing was not destroyed completely. What had happened, floating on the fourth morning above the Leviathan's final descent, was not an exorcism. It was a recognition, a naming. And naming a thing is not the same as eliminating it, but is only the necessary first step. The step without which elimination is impossible, because you cannot put down what you cannot see. And I had finally, after 3 months and 3 days and 3 miles of dark water, seen it. I lay in the bunk and felt the ship move through that cold, dark Pacific water. I thought again about Bethany, what she had said to me. Tell someone you love them in a way that cost you something. Her final words. She said them like a person who'd figured out the most important thing and wanted to make sure that it got out of the water with someone. I thought about the particular courage of that. To spend your last second delivering a message rather than screaming. To look out at the dark water coming up through the surface and choose in that half second of understanding to give something rather than to take. That was the opposite of envy. It was the precise opposite. Envy is the last second impulse to grab, to hold, to take what the dying moment still contains. Bethany, who had been carrying her own particular failure of the soul, the failure to claim her own life, to move forward with what mattered, and had in her last second what she chose, the thing her sin had prevented her from doing years before. She had given something freely and paid the cost without calculation. I thought about Gordon, who had already put his grief down. He'd found light still in the house and was walking toward it when the thing in the water made its calculation. Gordon, who had been, by Priya's analysis, the one among us who was no longer food, whose freedom was the thing that had drawn the creature's attention first, because whatever the Leviathan is, metaphor, monster, the living embodiment of accumulated human hunger, it knows the difference between a soul that is still carrying and a soul that has set down its burden. Gordon, who had gone peacefully, I told myself, who had been, for whatever it's worth, free when it took him. I didn't find as much comfort as this as I wanted to, but I held on to it because the other option was thinking about the water closing over him, and that option was not available to me in the bunk on the HMAS Bundaberg without becoming something I couldn't afford to become. Carson was in the medical bay, the ship's medic, a young woman from Adelaide who had the brisk, specific kindness of medical professionals who work in difficult environments. She had assessed him as physically intact, but psychologically fragile enough to warrant monitoring, which was clinical language for the kid who went into the ocean voluntarily, and we want to make sure he doesn't do something like that again. I went to see him on the second day after I'd finally slept and eaten something and used the ship's satellite communication system to get a message to Meridian's emergency contacts that I was alive, which would trigger the chains of notification that would eventually reach Renata. He was sitting up in the medical bay cot, looking better than he had any right to look after what he had been through. The specific resilience of a 22-year-old, the body's extraordinary capacity at that age to process punishment and to continue. He had a bandage on his left forearm where the wreckage had cut him during the storm. He was eating crackers from a paper sleeve with the focused attention of someone who had rediscovered the miracle of ordinary food. "Hey," I said from the doorway. "Hey." He offered me the crackers, and I took one and sat in the chair beside his cot. We sat for a while without talking, which was comfortable in the way that the silences of people who've been through something together are comfortable. Not empty, but loaded, full of shared reference points that don't require articulation. "I just kept seeing it," he said eventually. "The eye." "Yeah," I said. "It knew us," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "That's the part that I can't." He stopped. "I can handle the size of it. I can handle the fact that it exists. That something like that exists. I've been out here trying to surf waves that could kill me. I've got a relationship with scale and with things that could kill me." He turned the cracker sleeve over in his hands. "But the knowing, the fact that it looked at me and I felt like..." He stopped again. "Like it had read you," I said. "Yeah," he said. "Like it knew exactly what I was carrying." "It did," I said. I think it did. I think that's what it does." "What is it?" he asked. Simply, the way young people ask simple questions that older people have spent years learning to make complicated. I thought about how to answer that, about Priya's theory, the energy feeding, the emotional frequency, the thing that lives in the darkness and subsists on what we generate in it, about the book of Job and the chaos creature from the beginning of creation, pre-existing the ordered world, dwelling in the deep where order never had reached, about what Priya had said. In some versions, the reason the ocean exists is the Leviathan, the world built above it like a ceiling over a basement no one checks. "Envy," I said. "Made real, made large. The hunger that lives in the dark and compounds over time." I paused. "Or at least that's one true thing about it. I think there might be more true things." Carson thought about that, ate a cracker. "Dante," he said, and I looked at him with the surprise that I immediately felt embarrassed about, and he said with a faint, tired smile, "I was an English major before I switched to business. First 2 years I read everything." He paused. "Second terrace, envy. The envious have their eyes sewn shut with wire because their sin was the failure of sight. Seeing others good as their own evil, refusing to look at the world clearly." I thought about the Leviathan's eye, the 12-foot phosphorescent eye looking at us with its particular consuming hunger. "It looks at us with our own hunger," I said. "That's what the eye is. It sees us with envy. It looks at us the way envy looks at everything, with wanting, the need to possess, with the hunger to take what the surface world has and bring it down." "Into the dark," Carson said. "Yeah, into the dark," I repeated. We sat with that for a while as the ship moved. The ocean moved beneath us, patient and enormous, to 95% doing what it had always done, existing, indifferent, containing what it contained. "Jake's parents," I said. He looked at me. You said you were going back to see them. Yeah, he said, I think I am. Hold on to that, I said. Whatever the next weeks are like, and they're going to be bad, Carson. I've got to tell you, they're going to be bad. The next weeks are just, they're not going to be good. But hold on to the concrete things, the thing that you're going to do. The conversation with Jake's parents, and whatever the next thing after that is. He nodded. Something in his face resolved. Young and battered and more clear-eyed than he'd been when I'd found him on that debris field 3 days and a lifetime ago. Wyatt, he said as I stood to go. Yeah. What are you going to do when you get back? I thought about Renata, about Marcus, about standing in doorways with empty hands. The hard thing, I said. The thing that costs something. He nodded like he understood. I think he did. Pry and I talked on the deck on the evening of the second day, leaning on the rail with the Pacific stretching behind us in the direction we had come from, the sky going through its late afternoon evolution of color, the flat iron gray finally breaking, and what felt like a kind of permission into a genuine sunset, the first one since the crash, orange and coral, the specific heartbreaking pink that only open ocean sunsets achieve, as though the sky felt it owed us something and was making a modest attempt at payment, some kind of apology. We'd been interviewed, both of us, by the ship's commanding officer and by a civilian from the Australian Maritime Safety Authority who had satellite linked to a larger investigation team. We'd given our accounts, we'd described the creature. I'd watched the faces of people receiving our description move through a sequence that I recognized, because I had made the same journey in reverse. The polite professionalism, the careful note-taking, the absence of direct skepticism that would be impolite, but the presence of its shadow in every response. The civilian from AMSA had asked 3 separate times whether or not we were certain of the scale of what we'd seen, phrasing it slightly differently each time, and each time Priya had answered with the same precise, unflinching specificity. Dimensions, behavioral observations, pressure signature estimates, duration of sightings, number of witnesses, all of it delivered in the tone of a marine biologist presenting at a conference with the confidence of someone who knows that their credibility is the most important instrument they have, and who has decided to use it without flinching. I'd ask what I could. Carson had added what he could. The report would be filed. It would go somewhere, into some database, reviewed by people with the expertise to assess it and the professional incentive to classify it as something manageable, a mass hallucination, misidentification of known species under stress, the psychological distortions of trauma survivors at sea. Something with a box to put it in, because boxes are what institutions do with the 95%. They label it unexplored and agree that unexplored means probably empty, because the alternative is looking at the ocean you've been building your civilization next to for millennia and acknowledging you don't know what's out there in it. I didn't blame them. I understand their impulse perfectly. They won't believe it, I said to Pry on the deck. No, she said. Will you publish? Write this up? She was quiet for a moment. I have a colleague at CSIRO who studies deep sea bioluminescence. I have another at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, a research institute, and they work on deep sea pressure dynamics. I have 3 years of field notes from the Vanuatu stations. She paused. I have our testimony, which is first-hand and unambiguous, and will be professionally catastrophic to attach my name to. But, I said, but Gordon is dead. Bethany is dead. 58 other people are dead. She looked at the sunset. Something did that. Something real and physical and present in the ocean. It did that.
And the 95% isn't going to get better mapped by people who've decided in advance that it's empty. She would write it up. I knew it before she said so. That was who she was. The person who writes it up, who attaches her name to the uncomfortable data, who accepts the professional cost because the alternative is letting the uncomfortable data disappear. So what will you say? I asked. About what it is in the paper. She considered that. An unknown species, cephalopod or cetacean architecture most likely, given the pressure wave signature but with characteristics inconsistent with any known member of either group. Estimated scale indicated either a single organism or unprecedented size or... She stopped. Or a phenomenon that we don't have adequate scientific vocabulary for yet. That's honest, I said. It's all I have, she said. We watched the sunset, the ocean behind us enormous and patient, the water we had floated on for 3 days now, a distance away and receding somewhere in it, 3 miles down or more, the thing returning to its base and its trench, its unmapped blank of C4, carrying what it had taken and waiting for the patience of geological time, for the next thing to come along that was carrying enough of the right kind of hunger. Priya, I said. Yes? Coral reef ecologist based in Vanuatu. I looked at the sunset. It's a long way from Perth, from a long way from everyone. Yes, she said. Is that... Are you going back to that? She was quiet for a long time. The pink in the sky deepened and then began to fade, the way best colors always do. The way things that cost the most to have are always the ones that don't last. I'm going to visit my parents first, she said, in Melbourne. I haven't been home in 14 months. She paused. And I'm going to call some people I stopped calling when the work got busy. And I'm going to go back to Vanuatu and do the work. Because the work matters, I'm good at it. But I'm going to do things differently. She paused again. Less alone. Good, I said. Yeah, it's the right thing to do. She said it with that flat precision that was her particular signature. It landed the way it always did, like a fact delivered without sentiment, but with complete conviction, the most Priya form of warmth. Thank you, I said, for everything you did out there. She looked at me with the slight surprise of someone who has not been thanked recently enough. You too, she said, and then, Wyatt, put it down. Whatever's still up when you get home, put it down before it. She stopped, looked at the water. Before it finds you again. Leviathan, I said, follows us home. Envy, she said. Envy never left. I landed in Portland on a Tuesday. Not the Tuesday of the conference room, a different Tuesday. 17 days after the crash, released from the Darwin Hospital where I'd spent 9 days, and then the transit agreement that the investigation team required before they'd let the surviving passengers disperse back into their lives. 17 days of debriefings and medical assessments and conversations with the NTSB investigators who were collaborating with Australian authorities on the crash investigation. The grief counselors, the airline's insurers had provided with the aggressive efficiency of people managing liability, and the journalist who'd found the hotel. 3 survivors of a major Pacific crash. That's a story that moved units. It gets clicks. And who'd I declined to speak to, all of them, with the exception of one brief statement. I said was grateful to be alive. My thoughts were with the families of those we'd lost, which was true and insufficient, but it was the best I could do. Renata had called within hours of the initial notification that I was alive, before I'd had a chance to reach her, the airline's emergency contact protocol having worked as designed. I had taken the call in the ship's communications room, sitting in an institutional chair with a satellite phone heavy in my hand, the sound quality intermittent and slightly unreal. And I heard her voice and felt something in my chest that was not the cold, dark thing. It was not the hunger. Something that was the opposite of those things. Something warm and real and painful, precisely ordinary. "Wyatt," she said, just the way she said it, the specific, unrepeatable sound of my name in her voice, the relief in it naked and complete and without any of the management that ordinary phone calls have. It told me more than anything, she said after. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm alive. I'm okay." "I know, they told me. I know, She stopped, a sound I'd never heard from her. I just needed to hear you say it." "I'm saying it," I said. We talked for 12 minutes before the connection deteriorated. There had been nothing efficient or composed about either of us. Renata had cried and then apologized for crying and then cried again, which was the most completely real I had heard her be in months. I sat in the communications room of an Australian patrol vessel and felt the hunger in my chest, looking at that realness and trying by old reflex to audit it, and then feeling it fail. The machinery stalling. The cold, dark thing attempting to run its calculations and finding that the inputs had changed. The data set had fundamentally been altered by 72 hours of water and darkness and the eye of the Leviathan looking at me with my own face. I could not audit her grief anymore. I couldn't find the evidence against her and her crying on a satellite phone over a man she'd thought was dead. I'd let her cry. I had said his name, Copernicus, because she'd said she'd been keeping him with her, that she'd brought him to the studio every day, that she'd been talking to him. It was absurd, but she'd been talking to a dog about whether I was going to be okay. And the specific absurdity of that, the warmth of it, the intimacy of a woman talking to a golden retriever about the man she loved, had gone through the cold, dark thing like light through ice. I told her I was coming home, and she said she would be there, and that was enough. For 17 days of debriefings and grief counselors and journalists and medical assessments, that was enough. Portland received me the way Portland receives everything. The gray skies and the smell of rain and the particular Pacific Northwest light that is soft and diffuse, and that I've always found, even on its most overcast days, more comforting than sunshine in most other places. The city looked like itself. The airport looked like itself. The cab to Woodstock neighborhood moved through traffic on the 205 and then down Powell and then through the familiar streets of the neighborhood, past the coffee shop on the corner and the bookstore and the park where I walked Copernicus on Sunday mornings, and all of it was exactly as I had left it. Because, of course it was. Because the world doesn't rearrange itself to mark the things that happen to you. And this is both its cruelty and its mercy. The bungalow, the porch light was on. Though it was 2 in the afternoon, the maple in the front yard that I'd planted the first spring we'd arrived there was taller now, the leaves just beginning their autumn turn, the front door opening before I'd made it up the porch steps, Copernicus erupting through the gap with the full-body ecstasy of a golden retriever who's been informed by the universe that something very important is about to happen and has decided to meet it at maximum velocity. He hit me at the top of the porch step with both front paws and approximately 70 pounds of joyful conviction. I grabbed him. I sat down on top of the porch step. I held my dog, and he conducted his full forensic investigation of my 17 days. Every new smell, every story, the salt air, the ship's diesel, it was all written into my clothes and skin, and he did it with the thoroughness of love that has no language but touch. Renata stood in the doorway. She looked the same, yet she looked different. The same in that objective documentary sense. The same dark hair, same asymmetric cut, the same eyes that I've been trying to describe accurately for 3 years, have never quite managed. A brown that is sometimes green and sometimes gold depending on the light, the kind of eyes that require multiple visits. The difference was harder to quantify. She looked like someone who had spent 17 days with the fact she couldn't manage or project manage or organize into something more comfortable, and who had consequently become slightly more present, more immediate, specifically there, than the version of her I had been leaving for the airport, which had been slightly managing me, slightly composed, slightly performing the right kind of send-off for a business trip. But this was not that. This was real. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said from the porch step, with Copernicus redistributing his weight across my lap. She came and sat on the step beside me, not facing me, beside me, which is how she does things, which is the side-by-side approach that I've always loved about her. The preference for shared orientation over confrontation. We looked at the maple in the front yard, the street, the ordinary Tuesday afternoon of the Woodstock neighborhood, and Copernicus accepted his new configuration as normal, settled his entire body across both of our laps with the magnificent presumption of dogs, and we sat like that for a few minutes without saying anything. "I brought you home," she said finally, very quietly. I looked at her. "When I thought you were..." She stopped. "When they told me the plane was down and before they confirmed survivors, I just kept..." She stopped again and pressed her lips together, and then I just kept thinking, bring him home. Whatever the universe is, whatever is out there, bring him home. And there it was. That was the whole cathedral, built from 3 words and the name "Can't Wait To" and Marcus. And here was the foundation of it, the actual thing it had been built on. She had asked the universe to bring me home. Not Marcus, not anyone else, me. I'd spent 3 months building the verdict in the dark, and the foundation, the whole construction rested on this, that she had asked the universe to bring me home, and the universe, or something, had. The cold dark thing made one more attempt, a last faint signal, a ghost of the cathedral, a brief flicker of the machinery starting up, and then I put it down. Not dramatically, not with any of the ceremony that the enormity of the gesture seemed to require, simply the way you put something down when you've been carrying it too long and your arms finally fully give it out. I put it down. "Renata," I said. "Yeah?" "I need to tell you something." I looked at the maple, the leaves turning. "I need to tell you something that is going to make me sound like exactly the kind of person I don't want to be. I'm going to tell you anyways, because I think you need to deserve the honest account. And because I think I've been giving you a performed account for the last 3 months, and that isn't..." I stopped and started again. "You deserve the real one." She was quiet, listening. The specific quality of her listening, which I've always known meant she was taking something in rather than preparing her response. She was taking it in. "I've been running a prosecution," I said, "in my head, since the summer mixer, since you met Marcus." I paused. "I've been collecting evidence and inventing evidence for a verdict I reached about you and him on almost no actual information. I've been auditing your love, every look, every time you said his name, every pause before an answer. I've been treating you like a suspect." I paused again. "And the worst part is that I knew I was doing it. I knew the evidence was manufactured, I knew the verdict was predetermined, and I kept doing it anyway, because the fear of losing you was less manageable than the certainty of having already lost you, even if the certainty was false. That's not love. That's what envy does to love. That's what I've been doing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I needed you to know that." The maple, the street, Copernicus breathing his deep, contented dog breath across both our laps. Renata was quiet for a long time, long enough that the discomfort of it became its own form of honesty. She was not managing the silence, she was genuinely in it, processing the thing I'd put on the table. Marcus, she said finally. Yes. The text. She said it with a directness that told me she knew what I was talking about, that she had noticed the notification, had perhaps even suspected. Yeah, I saw 3 words in your name for him in my contact, and I built a conviction, I said. She exhaled slowly. It was about a birthday surprise for you. Your birthday's in October. I've been asking him for suggestions. He works with you. He knows what you'd like. Because I was trying to plan something. The gallery show I'd mentioned, there was an artist friend of mine whose opening was going to be around your birthday. And I wanted to know if you'd actually want to go to that or whether I should look at something else. She paused. That was it. The whole thing, a birthday party I've been planning for a month. And I sat with that. I sat with it and felt the cathedral come down. Not with any fanfare, not with the crash and drama that the size of the construction might have implied. Just down. The way something that was never structurally sound eventually comes down. Quietly and in stages and with a slight sense of embarrassment that it was ever up at all. I know, I said, because I did. Because some part of me had always known, the part that the cold dark thing had been working so hard to suppress. I know. That doesn't make the thing that I've been doing okay. No, she said gently. It doesn't. I know. She turned and looked at me full face, the eyes that require multiple visits. You almost died, she said. Yeah. And you came home and the first thing you did was tell me the worst thing about yourself. Bethany told me to, I said, which made no sense out of context and which I would explain later in the long evening ahead over the lemongrass soup she'd already made me in advance on my arrival. Because of course she had. When I would tell her the full story, all of it, the crash and the water and the 5 of us and Gordon and Carson and Bethany's last words and Priya and the thing in the ocean, and she would listen the way she listens, taking it in, and she would cry twice and I would let her. Bethany told you to, she repeated. She said. I stopped. The loss of Bethany, which I had been managing with the same distance I'd been applying to everything, hit me suddenly and fully. The way delayed grief hits you when you finally created something, the safety allows it to arrive. She said to tell you that I love you in a way that cost me something. Renata looked at me for a long moment, then she took my hand, both of hers around mine, the same grip she uses for the coffee mug, thumbs overlapping, fingers wrapped completely and warm and real and freely given. It's going to take me some time to trust the account, to... You know what I mean. I believe you mean it, but trust isn't... I know, I said. I know what trust is, and I know what it's not. I looked at our hands. I'm not asking you to be fine. I'm asking you to know the real one, to have this honest account. I paused. What you do with it, that's up to you. She squeezed my hand. October is a month away, she said. Yes. The gallery show is on the 14th, okay? You'd hate it, she said with the smile that reaches her eyes, the real one. It's all abstract ceramics and people and expensive glasses saying liminal. You'd be miserable. I would be so miserable, I said. I'll look at something else, please. Copernicus made a sound of deep satisfaction and adjusted his weight. We sat on the porch step in the gray Tuesday afternoon and held hands and looked at the maple tree and the turning leaves, and I breathed the Pacific Northwest air, the Douglas fir and the rain, cold and clean, entirely unlike the ocean, and I felt the emptied space in my chest where the cold dark thing had lived. Not gone, not cured. The hunger would come back. Hunger always comes back, but it would be different. visible now, named. And a named thing can be put down when you feel it starting to build, can be seen for what it is before the cathedral goes back up, can be caught in the early stages rather than the full elaborate conviction. That was the work. That was what the ocean had cost me. Not just the days on the water, not just Gordon and Bethany and the 58 others, but the comfortable darkness of my own interior. The work now was to live in the light that the absence of comfortable darkness makes available, which is less comfortable and more honest and harder, but better. I went to see Marcus on Thursday, not to have a confrontation, not the righteous reclamation I had imagined in my worst moments on the water, when the cold dark thing had rehearsed 100 versions of the scene that would end with Marcus publicly exposed, professionally destroyed, and me standing in the ruins of his credibility with my arms crossed. That's what Envy's script was, not mine. I put the script down with everything else. I knocked on the open door of his office, which was one floor above mine and had a better view of the river, which he had mentioned to me exactly once and which I had mentally cataloged as evidence, which it wasn't. He was standing at his standing desk with his headphones around his neck and his half-eaten lunch pushed to one side, and he saw me, and something moved across his face, quickly, then managed. That was the part that surprised and genuinely relieved me, and I thought, the specific of guilt, of someone who has known on some level that they've been getting away with something. Wyatt! He said, Jesus, you're alive. I said, yeah. I heard, I got the notification, obviously, when the plane went down, and then when they confirmed survivors and said you were one of them, He stopped. Oh man, how are you? I'm working on it, I said, which was true. Marcus, can I sit down? He nodded, and I sat in the chair across from his standing desk, and he pulled his standing desk over, and he sat on the stool, which was a specific accommodation, making himself lower, making the conversation level that I noted without cataloging as anything. The Tanaka Project, I said. He exhaled. It was a very quiet exhale, barely audible, but I heard it. Yeah, he said. The presentation to Fitch, I said, the quarterly review. You used the first person singular throughout. A pause. He had the grace not to immediately reach for the defense. Oh man, I know, he said. That framework was mine, I said. The methodology, the survey analysis, the Kyoto relationship, that was me. The executive summary was yours, and it was excellent, and I told you that. The market analysis was yours, but the rest was mine. And you presented it in a way that made that invisible. I know, he said again, quieter. Well, I should have said something then, I said. But I didn't, and that's on me. So I'm saying it now. I paused. I am the lead on the Tanaka project. I need that to be reflected in how this project is presented. Internally to the partners, to the Tanaka team going forward. I need to be the first author on the deliverables. I need to be the point of contact with Dr. Tanaka's team. And I need you to acknowledge in the next partner level communication that the project framework and methodology are mine. I paused. That's what I'm asking. He looked at me, something working behind his eyes, the calculation that confident people run when they're caught, the assessment of which version of themselves to deploy, whether it's cheaper to minimize or to acknowledge. I watched it happen and felt no satisfaction, which surprised me. I had imagined satisfaction. What I felt was something quieter, something like the completion of a sentence that had been left unfinished for too long. Yeah, he said. Okay, yeah. And then, Wyatt, you don't need to. I said, whatever you're going to say, you don't need to. I stood up. This is the conversation I should have had with you 3 months ago, and now we've had it. We'll figure out the rest. Wyatt, he said again, and I stopped because something in the quality of it was different than the professional management of the previous exchanges. I heard what happened out there. I heard. He stopped. Man, I'm just glad you're back. I'm glad you came back. I looked at him. Marcus Hale, 31-year-old, magazine jaw, effortless confidence, genuinely good at his job, genuine and probably unconsciously willing to take more than his share when no one was watching. A person with whatever he carried, whatever version of the cold dark thing he'd been given, whatever hunger drove that behavior I'd spent 3 months building a cathedral around. Not a monster. Never a monster. Yeah, me too, I said. The Tanaka project delivered in February. The final report carried my name first, Dr. Wyatt Drake, lead analyst, and Marcus's second with clear attribution of the methodology and framework in the executive summary that Robert Fitch read. He read the methodology and they approved without comment, which was his way of acknowledging something without having to say it out loud. Dr. Aiko Tanaka sent me a personal email after the delivery in the precise and generous English that she always used in our written communications, saying that the work was outstanding and that she'd hoped we would have occasion to collaborate again. I read the email on a Saturday morning on the back porch of the bungalow with a mug of coffee, and I held it with both hands, thumbs overlapping. Copernicus was moving through the yard. The October gallery show had been replaced with a weekend in a rented house on the Oregon coast, a place with a wood-burning fireplace and a view of the Pacific that Renata had found and booked and described to me over dinner with the specific, slightly tentative excitement of someone trying a new approach to something. The weekend had been what she'd hoped. The fire and the view and the long walks on the beach where the Pacific looked entirely different from a shore than it did from the surface. Manageable, beautiful, correctly proportioned. And I stood at the water's edge one morning while Renata slept in, and Copernicus investigated the tide pool, and I'd looked at the ocean. And I thought about what was in it. I thought about Gordon's granddaughter, who'd been born in November, a girl, which he had not lived to know, 7 pounds 4 ounces, named Harriet, after his wife. Carson had sent me a message the month before to tell me he had been to see Jake's parents in Columbus, that it had been hard and necessary, and that Jake's mother had hugged him for a long time in their front doorway, and had said she was glad he came. Priya had sent me a paper, pre-publication, 43 pages, meticulous and clear-eyed and fully signed with her name at the top. She titled, Anomalous Organism Encounter in the Melanesian Basin, a first-hand account and preliminary biological framework, and which would be published the following spring to the exact professional reception she had predicted, a mixture of serious attention from a small community and a wider dismissal, and which she submitted anyway, with the equanimity of someone who had made peace with what things cost. I looked out at the ocean, the 95%, the vast, unmapped dark below the surface of the world, containing what it contained, ancient and pressurized and patient, containing that blank bathmeritic survey, the blank that was now annotated in the digital files of the AMSA investigation, with a notification that would take years to be fully examined and would probably never be what anyone else wanted it to be, containing the Leviathan. I'd stood in the water's edge in that October morning, Copernicus in the tide pool, and I had felt not the cold dark thing which was present but quiet, dormant, the way hunger is quiet when it is recently fed on something real. What I felt was something I can only call respect. The specific respect of a man who has looked at something enormous and old and dangerous, and has been looked back at with his own hunger magnified to geological scale, and who has survived not because he was strong enough to defeat it, but because he was honest enough finally to stop feeding it. The Leviathan had not been defeated. It had descended. It had returned to its trench, its basin, its 3 miles of dark, to wait. It was waiting now as I stood at the shore with my coffee, as it had always waited, as it would always wait, because it was older than patience itself and it didn't need to hurry. It had been there before the first human being looked at the ocean and decided that it looked safe, and it would be there after the last one. But it had not taken me, and I was here on the shore in that October morning, with the coffee and the dog and the woman inside still sleeping, the bungalow behind me with it restored, its windows, its finished floors, the maple in the front yard turning its last colors before the fall, and the ordinary Tuesday of my life waiting past the weekend to be lived differently, honestly, and with the cost paid in full. That was enough. That was beginning to understand everything. There's one more thing I need to tell you, and I need to be honest because the honest account is the whole point. And because I promised myself sitting on the porch step with Renata's hands around mine, that the honest account was the only one I would give from now on. 2 months after I came home, I had a dream. I was in the water, the South Pacific, the same stretch, the same gray pewter morning, but I was alone. No wreckage, no debris field, no survivors, just me, treading water in the middle of the ocean, in the vast blue-gray of the Pacific. It was open, the horizon empty in every direction, the sky low and cloud-covered, and the water very, very deep beneath me. And it came up, slowly, the way it had always done. The gradual darkening beneath the surface, the thermal shift, the pressure wave. It rose from the 3 mile dark with the patience of something that has all of the time in the world. It rose until the great phosphorescent eye was level with the surface, 6 feet from me, looking at me across the short distance of the water with its ancient, cold, consuming hunger. And I looked back. In the dream I was not afraid, but I'm not going to tell you why, because I don't entirely know why. Except the naming of things has a power that I didn't fully understand before the Pacific. And I had named this thing. And the named thing was different from the unnamed thing in the specific way that fear of the known is different from fear of the unknown. Still real, still enormous, but contained by language in a way it hadn't been before. I looked back at the eye that looked at me. And then I said in the dream out loud on the surface of the ocean in a voice that the water absorbed without returning an echo. I said, I see you, and I know what you are, and you're not getting back in. The eye held me, the hunger in it, immense and old and genuinely terrible. It pressed against me with all its geological weight. And then slowly, it descended. The light of the eye dimming as it went, moving away from the surface, backing toward the dark, back toward the 95%, back to the trench where the world does not go. And I woke up in the bungalow bedroom, Renata asleep beside me on her side facing away, which is simply how she sleeps. The gray Portland morning beginning its slow illumination of the curtains, Copernicus at the foot of the bed, audibly dreaming. And I lay there and breathed, and the dream faded the way dreams do, and the ordinary morning assembled itself around me with its coffee and its light and its restorative, complete, magnificent ordinariness. The hunger was there, quiet in my chest. I acknowledged it. I named it. I put it down, and I got up, and I went to make the coffee.
This is Leviathan, what swims beneath the skin of the world. Part 5, The Deep Record. 1 year later. There's an entry in the journal of a Dutch merchant sailor named Cornelius van der Hooft written in 1643 aboard the VOC vessel Zeewolf during a transit of the South Pacific that was discovered in the archives of Rijksmuseum Museum in Amsterdam in 1987 by a graduate student named Petra Anholtz, who was researching the colonial space trade and who found it apparently wedged behind a water-damaged ledger of pepper tonnage from Batavia, where it had been sitting unremarked for 340 years. The entry is dated the 14th of March. It's 7 pages long, written in a cramped and urgent Dutch that the archivist who later translated it described as markedly different from the measured mercantile prose of Vanderhoof's other entries, more pressured, the letters larger and less regular, the hand of a man writing quickly, the way people write when they're afraid that time is short, and the thing they are writing must be completed before something stops them from completing it. Vanderhoof described a night on the open Pacific, somewhere south of what he calls the Groot Licht, the Great Emptiness, during which the Zeewolf was already becalmed on a flat, windless sea. He described the quality of the water, perfectly still, like glass, like a mirror in which the stars were trapped. He describes a pressure wave that moved through the ship without apparent source, as though the sea itself exhaled beneath us. He described the water changing color in a specific location, becoming dark within dark, a darkness that moved with intention. He described in the urgent, cramped letters of a frightened man something rising from the water. He doesn't describe what he saw in detail. He writes that he tried and found that language was insufficient. Det all heeft geen kamer voor dit ding, he writes. Language has no room for this thing. He writes that what he saw was old in a way that the word oud cannot contain. He writes that it looked at the ship with an eye als inverdat brand in het itched, like a fire that burned in the ice. And then he writes this in the last paragraph of the entry, in letters that are so large and deliberate that Petra Anholtz described them in the footnote of the paper she eventually published on the entry as the letters of a man choosing each word as carefully as he had ever chosen anything. It translated approximately as, "It wants what we have. It wants the life we lead at the surface. It wants the warmth. And it wants the dark thing we carry in our chest that is not made of light. That thing which every man carries that keeps him awake at night. That is the food. We are not the prey. Our fear is not the food. What we want that we cannot have, that is what pulls it upward." Cornelius Vanderhoof, Dutch merchant sailor, 1643, the South Pacific, 383 years before Wyatt Drake. He saw it too. I found the Vanderhoof entry in a footnote in Priya's published paper. The paper came out the previous April in a marine biology journal that I will not name here because I don't want this account to be the thing that follows that journal around forever, though by the time this is read, the association is probably unavoidable. Priya had been right about the reception. A small, serious community of deep-sea researchers had engaged with it with genuine interest, several of them reaching out to her directly to discuss the methodology and the eyewitness account. One of them a researcher from the Schmidt Ocean Institute who had been conducting autonomous underwater vehicle surveys of the Melanesian Basin and who had, upon reading Priya's paper, gone back through his AUV data and found in the bathmeritic surveys one conducted 6 months before the crash of Pacific Meridian Flight 2247. The blank. The same blank. The absorption anomaly in the sonar return. The area that did not reflect. He had notated it, as Dr. Tanaka's team had, as a likely sensor artifact. He called Priya. They spoke for 3 hours. He sent her the data. She sent him a coordinate set derived from our accounts of the crash site and the drift pattern in the days that follow, correlated against the Australian Maritime's investigation position estimates. The blank was right in that place. Priya called me after that conversation. It was a Sunday morning in Portland, early.
the kind of early that suggests the caller has been awake for a while already. And when I picked up, I could hear in her voice the specific quality of someone who's had a significant thing confirmed and is working out how to say it. "The anomaly is real," she said, without preamble. "Not a sensor artifact, confirmed by 2 independent datasets from 2 different survey vessels with different sonar hardware." She paused. "It's real, and it's large, and it moved." "Moved," I said. "Between the 2 surveys, 4 months apart. 2 different vessels, the anomaly appears in different positions. The same shape, the same absorption signature, but a different location." She paused. "It moved approximately 60 miles to the northwest between the 2 surveys." I stood in the kitchen of the bungalow with the phone against my ear, and the gray Sunday morning beginning to develop outside the window, Copernicus at my feet watching me with the attentive concern of a dog who has learned to read the quality of a person's stillness. 60 miles in 4 months, I said. "At approximately half a mile per day," she said, "which is consistent with the movement pattern of certain large deep-sea organisms. Sperm whales cruise at roughly this speed over long distances, but the sperm whale is 60 feet. The anomaly is considered larger than that." I sat down at the kitchen table. "Priya?" "Yes?" "What are you going to do with this?" I paused. "Publish it," she said, "with the Schmidt researcher as co-author, with the full dataset, with the full eyewitness account." Another pause. "I'm going to put it in the record, and whatever happens after that is not something I can control." "The record," I said. "The deep record," she said, and I heard in her voice the same thing I had heard on the deck of the HMAS Bundaberg, the same quality of settled conviction. Not fearlessness, but the specific courage of someone who has decided that the cost of a thing is acceptable and has done the calculation consciously and in full. "The record that says, we were there, we saw it, we survived it, and this is what it is. Whatever they do with that," a pause, "someone will take it seriously. Maybe not now, maybe not for 20 years, but it will be there in the record. And the next person who sees it, wherever they are, whenever they are, they will find what we left." The next person who sees it. I thought about Cornelius Vanderhooft writing his 7 pages in cramped, urgent Dutch on the becalmed Zeewolf in 1643, wedging them behind the pepper ledger, finding the right container for the same thing that language had no room for, sending it forward through time to Petra Anholtz, and then to Priya, and then to me, 383 years of the record surviving in the dark. "Okay," I said. "Okay, well, add my account to the paper, whatever you need." I already have," she said. "I just wanted to ask permission retroactively." "Of course you were," I said. She laughed. The first time I had heard her laugh, it was like everything else about Priya, precisely calibrated and entirely real. "How are you?" she said with the warmth of the word restored. "Well, I'm working on it," I said. Well, that was true. I thought might always be true. It had begun to understand that always being true was not a failure, but a description of what the work actually is. "Good," she said. That's the right answer." Carson came to Portland in June. Not for any particular occasion. He was doing a loop of the Pacific Coast on a motorcycle he'd bought in the winter, the kind of trip that 22-year-old men make when they've been given the specific permission that near-death experiences grant, the permission to stop postponing the things they've been meaning to do with their lives. He texted me from Astoria to say he was an hour out. I told him to come by the bungalow. Renata made dinner, and the 3 of us sat on the back porch until 11 o'clock in the warm June night, with wine and the citronella candles, and Copernicus patrolling the perimeter of the yard with his customary thoroughness. Carson looked good, not unaffected.
Nobody who's been through what he'd been through could look unaffected. I would have been suspicious of anyone who did. But he looked good in the way that people look when they've done the hard thing and found that they survived it. The guilty hunch he'd carried and his shoulders on the wreckage, it was gone. Something had opened up in his posture, the physical adjustment of the person who'd been carrying something in his body that he has now set down. He had been to see Jake's parents in February. He told me about it in a message at the time, 3 lines, spare and factual, the way he communicated the things that cost him most. Went to Columbus, saw them, hard and right. Jake's mom cried and then made me lunch. And then a line that I read and reread. Told them he talked about our trip all the time. They said they were glad I went, even alone. And then, I think Jake would have liked the part with the thing in the water. He was weird about the ocean. On the back porch in June, he told me the rest of it, the full version, the one that took 2 hours and a bottle of wine and the specific privacy of a late night with people who already know the outline. He told me about sitting in Jake's parents' room in Columbus, the family photos on the wall, Jake's high school track trophies on the shelf, the particular domestic archaeology of a family home that has been lived in by the same people for 20 years, and he felt the weight of guilt come off him as he talked, not all at once, not dramatically, in stages. As the conversation went on and Jake's mother kept offering him more food and Jake's father kept asking more questions about the trip, about what Carson was planning next, about life, as though the fact of Carson's continued life was something worth being interested in and not a guilty reminder of what Jake's was not. He told me he had gone surfing in Fiji in the spring. The trip was finished. He had surfed the break that he and Jake had been planning to surf on a morning when the water was clear and the swell was consistent and the beach was empty except for 2 local fishermen who watched him from the sand with a patient interest of people who have seen many visitors pass through and have formed no strong opinions about them. He'd paddled out and sat on the board in the lineup and looked back at the beach and looked out at the horizon and thought about Jake, specifically and without flinching, for a long time. And then I surfed, he said, because that was the point. That was what we were going to do. He paused. It was good. It was a really good wave. Renata across the table had tears on her face that she wasn't managing or excusing. She had heard the full story from me months ago, all of it. She had carried it with me in the way that she carries things that belong to me, not taking them from me, not reprocessing them into something more comfortable, but simply holding the other end of them, which is the only form of support that actually works. She had cried twice, telling it, and then gotten up and held my face in her hands for a long time without saying anything, which was worth more than anything she could have said, and which had cost her something, and which I had received completely without any audit, without any calculation, with nothing but the open-handed gratitude of a man who's been giving the real thing. Carson raised his glass. To Gordon, he said. It was not a question, not a toast in a traditional sense either. Just a name, just the act of saying it, putting it in the air in the June evening, of insisting on his presence. To Gordon, Renata said and raised her glass, because Renata had absorbed Gordon too, his granddaughter, the light still on in the house, the patient military pragmatism, and to the way she understood what I had come back from. To Bethany, I said. We held the names warm in the June air for a moment. Then Carson drank, and we drank, and Copernicus put his head on Carson's knee with the unerring instinct of a dog for the person in the room who most needs a dog's attention. What are you going to do? I asked. With the rest of the loop after Portland. He had the look of a person who had given this real thought and arrived at a real answer. I'm going to finish the coast, he said. Down to Big Sur, and then I'm going to go back to school. He paused. Not business. I want to do something with the water. He said it simply, without the self-consciousness that younger people sometimes have about changing direction, about discovering too late that they're going the wrong way. He said it the way you say a thing that has been true for a while, and that you're only now given the right name. Marine conservation, I think.
I don't know the specifics yet, but the water. He paused. I need to understand the water. I looked at him. 22 years old, clear-eyed and present, turning himself like a compass needle toward the thing that had almost killed him, which is either the bravest or the most human thing a person can do. I'm not sure there's a meaningful difference. Go talk to Priya, I said. She'll know where to start. I already emailed her, he said. She replied with a 12-point reading list. He paused. The first one is the Book of Job. Renata laughed. The real one, the one that reaches her eyes, and I felt it in my chest where the cold dark thing used to live, warm and unaudited and completely and freely received. Harriet Gordon Platt was born on November 3rd, 7 pounds 4 ounces, to Gordon's daughter Melissa at a hospital in San Diego, with her husband and Gordon's sister in the room and a framed photograph of Gordon on the windowsill that Melissa had put there that morning. She told me later because she wanted him to see her. I know this because Melissa called me. She had found me through the investigation, the survivor list, publicly available, the formal account of who had been on the plane and who had come off the water. She'd called to thank me, which I had not known how to receive, and had said so honestly, telling her that Gordon was the reason any of us had made it through the first 2 days, that his competence and his patience and his particular willingness to be the one who goes in twice in a storm in the middle of the night had been the structural logic of our survival, that he had been the bravest man I had ever been beside in a genuinely dangerous situation, and that I thought about him every single day. She'd been quiet for a moment, and then she had said, "He told me about the grandbaby right before he left. He said it was the thing he was most looking forward to in the world." She paused. "He said to me," and this is such a dad thing to say, he said, "I've done the hard part in my life, and now I get to do the good part." The good part. He'd been on his way to the good part. And I sat with that for a long time after the call, in the particular quiet of something that is not resolution, but something adjacent to it. The awareness that the story of Gordon Platt does not end with the water closing over him, but it continues in a 7 pound 4 ounce girl named Harriet on a hospital windowsill in San Diego, that the thread of him runs forward through time in a way that all threads run forward if you let them, if you refuse to let the dark water be the last word. I sent Melissa a card when Harriet arrived. Nothing elaborate. I am not, have never been, a man who is good at cards, but I wrote one sentence after a long time sitting at the kitchen table with the pen not moving. Gordon made sure we had enough time to be found, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for it. She texted back a photo of Harriet, 3 days old, in a yellow onesie with Gordon's nose unmistakably, and the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere very new and is assessing it with complete seriousness. I put the photo on the refrigerator with a magnet. It's still there. I want to tell you what I know about the Leviathan now, a year out from the elevated position of a man who's had time to read and think and cross-reference and discuss and sit with what happened. I want to give you the full account, the theological, mythological, scientific, such as it is, not because any single thread of it is sufficient, but because the truth about a thing like the Leviathan is the kind of truth that only comes from the combination of all the threads. The way a rope is only a rope when enough individual fibers are twisted together to bear the weight. In the book of Job, the oldest complete book in the Hebrew Bible, predating the Torah in some scholarly estimates, a text so old that its origins are genuinely contested, its authorship a mystery, God answers Job's accusations with 2 speeches, delivered from the whirlwind, that are among the most remarkable pieces of writing in the entire tradition. Job has been afflicted, tested, stripped of everything, and has demanded an explanation. And God's answer is famously, troublingly, not an explanation at all, but an interrogation. "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in the search of the depth?" And then God describes the Leviathan at length in the detail of someone describing something real.
Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook? None is so fierce that dare stir him. Who then is able to stand before me? The argument being, look at this thing I made. Look at what I made and what it does and what it is. If you can't comprehend the Leviathan, and you can't, then you can't comprehend me. And you can't comprehend the terms of your own situation. And the appropriate response to your condition is not accusation, but humility. God points to the monster as an argument for the limits of human understanding. This has always been the most interesting thing about Leviathan to me, the thing that I kept returning to. It's not presented as the enemy, it's presented as the evidence that the world is larger than our categories for it, deeper than our instruments can plumb, older than our languages can speak, and that correct response to being alive in this world is not the arrogance of the mapped and measured, but the humility of the one who has looked into the deep and understood, finally, how much is looking back. In Psalm 104, the Leviathan appears again. There go the ships. There is that Leviathan whom thou hast made to play therein. Play. The word is play. The most terrifying thing in the ocean is described as playing in the deep, as though the abyss is its playground, as though the dark and the pressure and the cold are its natural condition of delight. The Leviathan is at home where we cannot survive. It is native to the place that kills us. In the medieval theological tradition, Dante, Aquinas, the scholastic synthesis, the Leviathan was assigned to a specific domain, not just the sea, but envy. A creature of the deep was mapped to the sin of the deep itself, the hunger that lives below the surface of consciousness, below the level of reason and social performance and the managed self we present to the world. Envy, more than any other sin, lives in that 95%. It is the part of us that has not been explored, not been mapped, not been brought into the light and examined and assessed. It is the part that moves in the dark below the life we visibly live, generating its slow pressure waves, its thermal shifts, its cold patience. The Leviathan is envy made real, or, and I think this is closer, envy is the Leviathan made small, made individual, made portable, sized down to fit a single human chest, where it moves its patient circles and waits for the conditions it needs to surface. We are all, every one of us, floating above something. The question, the only question, the one that the water and the wreckage and the 3 miles of dark and the phosphorescent eye and Bethany's last words and prize paper and Gordon's good part and Carson's compass needle all combined to ask, is what we choose to feed it. There's one more thing that I need to tell you, the last thing, the honest account, all of it. 2 weeks ago, I was in the bathroom of the bungalow, early morning, the specific gray Portland morning that has characterized every significant moment in the story, as though the city's weather has decided to be consistent for thematic reasons. I was at the sink, running water, and I caught my own face in the mirror, which is such an ordinary thing it barely registers on most mornings. You look in the mirror, you see yourself, you perform the brief inventory of the face that faces do, and you move on. But on this particular morning, I looked at my face in the mirror of the bathroom of the bungalow I'd always been slowly and lovingly rebuilding for 3 years, and I felt the cold, dark thing again. It began to stir. Not the Leviathan, not the ancient geological hunger of the deep, just mine. The small, portable, individual-sized version, the one in my chest, the one that never fully left and never will. It stirred because of something I had read the night before, an industry newsletter, the kind of thing I scan on my phone in the 10 minutes before sleep, and in a brief item about Meridian Pacific Consulting landing a significant new contract, a multi-year environmental assessment of the Pacific Rim infrastructure projects, and in the item, Marcus's name as the lead analyst. His name, first, lead analyst, a significant contract. And the machinery, just for the moment, just for the duration of the cold, dark stir, had started up,
had offered the old architecture. Here's the evidence, here's the pattern, here's what it means. The cold, competent voice of envy saying, you should have that. You should be first. You were always first, and now you're not, and this is because of him and because of what he did. And I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw that machinery running, and I said out loud, quietly in the gray bathroom of the gray Portland morning, the same thing I had said in the dream on the open Pacific to the phosphorescent eye 12 feet across that was looking at me with my own hunger magnified. I see you, and I know who you are, and you are not getting back in. The machinery ran for another moment. The cold, dark thing circled once, twice, the way the Leviathan circled before deciding to descend. And then it went quiet. Not gone, I'll be honest about that, but not cured, not exorcised, not defeated in any permanent theatrical sense. Simply refused. Recognized and refused, which is not the same as not present, which is not the same as healed, which is the best way that any of us can honestly claim with things that we carry. The refusal is the work. The refusal done again every time the machinery starts, every time the cold dark thing stirs, every time the water below the life we lead at the surface shifts and the pressure waves arrive. The refusal, clear-eyed and honest and undramatic, done not once but every day for as long as we live above the deep. That's the work. And that is what I came home from the Pacific to do. I turned off the tap and I went to the kitchen to make coffee. I brought a mug to Renata, who was still in bed, reading her hair in the morning state that she's always never liked and I've always loved. And I set it on the nightstand beside her, and she looked up and said, "Thank you." The simple, unremarkable thank you of a person receiving a mug of coffee on an ordinary morning. The most ordinary thing in the world. The thing I would give in any 3 miles of dark and 72 hours and everything that lived in them to hear again. I went to the back porch. Copernicus followed. He went to the yard, began his daily survey of the territory, the thorough and joyful forensic investigation of everything that had happened in the yard since yesterday. And I held my coffee with both hands in the gray Portland morning and looked at the maple, which had been planted as a hopeful gesture and had become over 3 years a genuinely large tree, a tree with mass and permanence, and with the confidence of something that knows it is where it belongs. I thought about the ocean. I thought about what was in it. I thought about Priya at her desk in Vanuatu, writing the second paper, calling her parents on Sundays less alone. I thought about Carson on his motorcycle somewhere on the California coast, or back in Columbus at a university, reading the Book of Job on Priya's recommendation with the focused attention of a 22-year-old who has decided to understand the thing that almost killed him. I thought about Melissa in San Diego, about Harriet taking her to the park, the yellow onesie replaced by something new, Gordon's nose on a face that grows more specific every day. I thought about Bethany, who I would think about every day for the rest of my life, her last second, the choice that she made in it, the message she sent forward with me out of the water. And I thought about the Leviathan, down there, 3 miles down, moving in its slow 60 miles in 4-month arcs, through the unmapped dark, through the blank in the Bathmeritic survey, through the 95% of the world that we have agreed to call unknown, because the alternative is looking at it clearly, patient in the way that things are patient when they've existed longer than patience is a concept, feeding on what rises from the world above the water, the accumulated hunger of 8 billion people carrying their cold dark things in their chest, generating the slow consistent pressure of wanting what they don't have, of seeing others good as their own diminishment, of love turned into surveillance and work turned into competition, and every good thing clutched so tightly that the clutching destroys it. It was down there, and it would always be down there. And I was up here on the back porch with the coffee and the dog and the woman with the clay-smelling hands and the bungalow and the maple tree and the ordinary Tuesday of my life. And the cold dark thing in my chest quiet for now, refused for now, held at depth by the ongoing act of choosing to live at the surface, openly, honestly, with empty hands and the cost paid and the account kept true. The Pacific was 3 hours by air from Portland, 3 hours and 3 miles of water, and the Leviathan in the dark below it. And I was here. Here. And that, the specific, irreplaceable, hard-won here of a man who has looked at the thing in his own chest and looked at the thing in the deep water and understood that they are at the same time the thing that has chosen again today to refuse them both. That was the whole point. That was the whole point of everything. A note on the sources. Cornelius Vanderhoof's journal entry of March 14, 1643, as cited in Dr. Priaschetti's paper, Anomalous Organisms Enter in the Melanesian Basin, co-authored with Dr. James O'Core, Schmidt Ocean Institute, is available in translation in the supplementary materials of that paper. The Rijksmuseum archive reference is linked in the footnotes. Dr. Shetty's paper is available upon request from the Journal of Publication. The Bathmeritic anomaly data from the Melanesian Basin surveys is included as an appendix to the paper and remains, as of this writing, officially unclassified and unresolved. Pacific Meridian Flight 2247 is listed in the Australian Transport Safety Bureau Accident Database as case reference MO 2025-009, cause of crash undetermined, contributing factors under investigation. As of this writing, we have explored approximately 5% of the Earth's ocean. The rest remains. Leviathan. Wyatt Drake, Portland, October, 1 year later. On the 7 deadly sins in the Leviathan. In medieval Christian tradition, each of the 7 deadly sins was assigned a demonic guardian, a being whose nature embodied the sin it governed. Envy's guardian was the Leviathan. Of all the assignments, this one has always seemed the most accurate, because envy alone among the sins is defined by not what it does, but by what it cannot stop wanting. It is the hunger without a bottom, the wanting without a destination, the cold, patient, self-sustaining dark that lives below the life we visibly lead, waiting for the conditions that allow it to surface. We all float above it. The question is what we choose to carry.